so we're going to call to order the Tuesday, June 1st meeting of the Corte Madera Town Council. Rebecca, could we have a roll call, please?
Councilmember Lee.
Here.
Councilmember Mongan.
Here.
Councilmember Ravazio.
Here.
Vice Mayor Casissa.
Here.
Mayor Beckman.
Here, thank you. And please join me in the salute to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, everybody. That brings us to open time for public comment. This is an opportunity for members of the public who would like to speak to any items that are not on our agenda tonight, and members of the public will be given 3 minutes apiece to speak, and we will start with Phyllis. And Phyllis, you should be able to unmute whenever you're ready.
Right. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. I'm speaking tonight about the process the council's been using for filling commission vacancies. Prior to May of 2014, the process included the entire council interviewing applicants in a public meeting with discussion and decision to immediately follow. Decisions were based on written applications and interviews only, not any outside influences. All interviews, discussions, and decisions were open and transparent, which I do not feel they are now. And I'd like to suggest that the council returns to that open process, which is used by other councils and the Board of Supervisors. Because at this point, it looks like decisions are made by 2 members of the council. The discussions that led to those decisions are unknown by anyone, including other council members, for all I know. And the public is not being treated in a transparent way to know the reasons for the people you are appointing to the commissions. And that's it.
Thank you very much, Phyllis. I am not seeing any other hands up for open time at the moment. Rebecca, did we have any emailed public comments for open time for items not on the agenda?
There were no emailed public comments for open time.
Okay, then seeing no other hands, we're going to close public open time. There are no presentations tonight, which brings us to item 4, that is our consent calendar. I'm going to pull item 4E from our consent calendar because we have one council member with a conflict, but we're going to move through with everything else. So these are items that are routine or have been discussed previously and do not require further discussion, and any member of the council or the public can pull an item from the consent calendar for further discussion. So I'll start by asking if any council members would like to pull any additional items besides 4E from our consent calendar, or staff members.
Wait, Eli, did you say
Yes.
4? You said 4E was the minutes?
4E is the appointments to
Right, and that's the item you're pulling.
Yes.
Okay, so I thought I heard you say minutes. Sorry, my friend.
Oh, no worries.
Okay, bye.
No problem. Yeah, anybody want to pull anything? Yeah, RJ.
Mayor Beckman, I'd like to pull item 4B
Okay.
from the consent calendar.
Okay, sounds good. All right. If there's nothing else, we're going to open this up to members of the public. So members of the public, if you would like to pull an additional item besides 4B or 4E from the consent calendar or comment on any of these items, please go ahead and raise your hand via Zoom or email publiccomment@tcmmail.org, and we will start with Karen.
Hi, I have a question about 4D, and so I don't know if it needs to be pulled so that I can present the question or how you wish to handle it.
Amy, I'd like to leave it on and just let her ask her question and then ask staff to speak to that when we close public comment. Is that kosher?
I think that's fine. If there's anything regarding the question or something that might ask a member of council might want to pull it, that's fine as well.
Perfect. Okay, go ahead, Karen.
So my question is, will the details of this policy as stated accommodate flags being lowered to half staff, as the flags just were to honor the victims of the Santa Clara VTA murders, and then just before that to honor the passing of former Vice President Walter Mondale. So I just didn't know how the policy, if there needed to be anything in the policy to accommodate lowering the California flag to half-staff if there was another flag under it that was honoring something or other.
Okay, thank you, Karen. And Amy, did you want to speak?
Yes, under state and federal law, the town would only have the authority to lower its own town flag, which it doesn't have a town flag, I've learned. So generally it is the state that would issue the directive to lower the state flag. And then we would, of course, as a town, comply with the state's directive, and the same for federal, but we don't have the authority to determine whether to lower the federal or state flags.
But if the state flag was lowered and there was, in the hypothetical situation of the rainbow flag underneath it, beneath it, then the rainbow flag also would be lowered to half-staff beneath the California flag?
That's correct, because under federal, we have to comply with federal state law, and there's very specific regulations that are actually, most of them are in the policy, but we would comply. And so the federal flag has to be flown higher than the state flag, which would be flown higher than any commemorative flag.
Okay. I just, I've never seen a commemorative flag flown at half-staff, so I was just curious. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Karen. I am not seeing any other hands up right now for public comment on the consent calendar. Again, we'll come back after this to discuss items 4B and 4E, so there will be public comment opportunities for those individually. Rebecca, did we have any emailed public comments for the remainder of the consent calendar?
No, there were no emailed public comments received for the consent calendar.
Okay, then we will close public comment. We'll bring it back to the council, and I'd entertain a motion on items 4A, 4C, 4D, and 4F. Yeah, Fred?
I'll go ahead and make the motion.
Thank you, sir.
I'll second.
Charles seconds. Great, thank you, Charles. And Rebecca, could we have a vote, please?
Oh, she dropped out.
Oh, okay. We will, I think we do need to wait for her probably so she can call the roll. Welcome back.
Are you ready for the vote?
Yes, please.
Can you tell me who made the motion and the second, please?
Fred made the motion, Charles seconded.
Thank you. That was fast this time, at least. Councilmember Lee,
Yes.
Councilmember Mongan,
Yes.
Councilmember Ravazio,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Casissa,
Yes.
Mayor Beckman.
Yes, thank you. We're going to move on to item 4B now, and RJ, I'll let you start.
Yeah, Mayor Beckman, we just had some new information about some of the environmental permitting challenges that could impact schedule. So staff needs to evaluate whether it's appropriate to award or reject bids and rebid in the future. And so we just need a little more time to do that. And so we'd like to pull the item and take no action.
Okay, sounds good. Amy, do we need public comment or a vote on pulling this item from this agenda?
I think we should take public comment, but I don't think we need a vote.
Okay, sounds good. So we're going to open up item 4B to public comment now. So if you'd like to comment on this item, please go ahead and raise your hand via Zoom or email public comment at tcmmail.org. We'll just give a second here to see if any hands go up or if any emails come in. And I'm not seeing any hands. Rebecca, any last minute emails there on this item?
No, Mayor Beckman, there were no emailed public comments.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, RJ. So we're going to pull item 4B from this agenda. We're going to move on now to item 4E. This is regarding approving appointments of members recommended by the Town Council appointment subcommittees for 3 different boards and commissions. And I am happy to start with, yeah, Amy. Oh, of course. Right.
I'm gonna recommend that you actually subdivide item 4E because the conflict relates only to the Recreation and Parks Committee. And so what I would recommend is you pull for E1 and you can handle for E2 and 3, which a full council can participate in.
Great. Okay, thank you. And sorry, Bob, I totally forgot there. I was just plowing ahead. But yeah, so
Sorry.
we'll just do for E2 and 3 right now, and then come back for E1, which we have one council member with a conflict on, so he will be recused. So I guess we'll start with, are there any questions from council members on 4E2 and 4E3 concerning the appointments to the Planning Commission and Flood Control Board? And if not, we'll open this up to public comment. So if any members of the public would like to comment on these items, please go ahead and raise your hand via Zoom or email publiccomment@tcmmail.org. And I'm not seeing any hands up. Rebecca, did we get any emails about either of those boards?
No, Mayor Beckman, we did not receive any emails.
Okay, great. So then I will entertain a motion on 4E subparts 2 and 3, and then we'll come back separately for 4E1.
So moved.
Thank you, Leela. Do we have a second? Thank you,
Second.
Charles. Great. And Rebecca, whenever you're ready.
Councilmember Lee,
Yes.
Councilmember Mongan,
Yes.
Councilmember Ravazio,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Casissa,
Yes.
Mayor Beckman.
Yes, thank you. And now I'll turn it over to Bob.
Yes, I need to recuse myself on this item.
Great, thank you, sir. So Bob is going to turn his camera off and mute himself, so he is recused from this item. And so we're now discussing item 4E1, which is regarding appointments to the Parks and Rec Commission, and specifically ratifying the appointments recommended by the subcommittee. Do we have any questions from council on this item? And if not, we're going to open it up for public comment. So if you'd like to comment on this item, please go ahead and raise your hand via Zoom or email publiccomment@tcmmail.org, and we will start with Phyllis.
Yes, thank you. I would like to suggest that the recommendations made to fill the vacancies on the Park and Rec Commission be nullified and new interviews scheduled to take place at a future council meeting with discussion and decision based upon the written applications and interviews immediately to follow. My suggestion is based on the way this was handled by the council subcommittee and is not meant in any way to disparage the qualifications of the newcomers chosen to replace the 2 incumbents. My reasons are: 1, no reason has been given for removing 2 incumbents. Nate Blongren, the highly esteemed commission chair who was chosen by his fellow members to lead them, and Pat Ravasio, the most creative and engaged member who has been a force behind many of the current projects. And 2, that one of the members of the subcommittee, specifically Leela Mongan, sent an email to each member of the commission before the interviews asking for confidential opinions about working with any of the applicants. Not only do I find that to be highly inappropriate to ask commission members to give opinions of fellow members behind their backs, but her wording makes it look like she was trying to elicit negative comments about the incumbents. Recommendations should be made from the same information learned directly, not through hearsay, by both members of the subcommittee. And that means they are limited to the applications and the interviews themselves. And 3, the poor handling of process by subcommittee members has tainted their recommendations for appointment. And I would hope that the members of the council take this to heart, because at this point, no matter who ends up on that commission, people will always question the whys and wherefores of it. And if this was done by all the council members in a public meeting, this would not happen. And if interviews were limited to whatever is on the application itself and the questions that were asked and any follow-up questions, it would be clear to everyone why decisions are made. And I thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Phyllis. Let's see, we've got another hand that just came up from Margaret, so we're going to bring her on next. Whoops, where did she go? Okay, Margaret, you should be good to go. Are you there, Margaret? Don't seem to be able to hear her. Margaret, I'm not sure if there may be a technical issue, but we can't hear you. I'm gonna take you off here, and then if you wouldn't mind putting your hand back up, if you'd like to try again, that'd be great. And in the meantime, Rebecca, did we get any emailed public comments on this item?
No, I did not receive any emailed public comments on this item.
Okay, thank you. And I just want to wait a second here for see if Margaret wants to try this again. And Margaret, if you could, looks like your hand is down now. So if you could just raise your hand again, if you would like to speak. Happy to give it another try. She does not seem to be putting her hand up. Oh, there it is. Okay, great. All right, Margaret, you are talking is permitted and you're unmuted, but we are not hearing anything. So perhaps you might submit your comments via email. Trying to think if there's a better way.
We could try I think the Q&A is activated.
Oh, sure. Okay. Margaret, it seems like your microphone might not be working. So maybe if you want to use either the chat or the Q&A feature in this Zoom, you can just type in any comments and we're happy to read them aloud. I'm assuming she's probably typing, so I want to give her a minute and not rush her. All right, and let's see, not seeing any comments come in yet, written comments. So I think maybe what we might do is, Amy, if this works with you, maybe we'll close public comment and we can begin any discussions at the council. And then if a comment from Margaret comes in, I can reopen public comment and read it. Does that sound good?
I think that's fine.
Oh, it just came through. Perfect. Here it is. She says, oh, okay. She says, I support wholeheartedly the opinion just expressed by Phyllis Metcalf. Okay, great. Thank you, Margaret. Appreciate that. And if you want to submit fuller comments via email or anything, you're more than welcome to. In the meantime, not seeing any other hands up. And I believe Rebecca said we had no additional emailed public comments on this item. So we will close public comment and bring it back to the town council for discussion. I'm happy to start. You know, my feeling is that this is really a question of process, right? I think, you know, I think we set up a process that to my mind is fair and transparent and sets up a good due process. And we delegated, you know, that authority to subcommittees, as has been council practice since I think at least, you know, going maybe back to 2014 or something like that, and hasn't presented an issue since then. So I frankly don't see any reason to second guess the decision that the subcommittee came to. I think that that's kind of the definition of delegation, right? Especially lacking any evidence of any sort of improprieties. I know it was raised at one point that one of the subcommittee members, you know, reached out to other commissioners to ask their thoughts. To me, that frankly, it doesn't seem out of line. I feel like when you're making a personnel decision, so to speak, you know, you speak with somebody's coworkers. I think that's pretty reasonable. Obviously, council members, let me know if you disagree, but that's kind of my take on it. So I don't really see any reason, frankly, to circumvent the process that we set out here. I've got full faith in the decision that was made, and of course I want to thank both the outgoing commissioners who have done so much for our town, both on this commission and in other avenues, and I know they will continue to serve our town and our community that we all love. And I'm excited for the new commissioners to be joining as well. So those are my thoughts. I'll turn it over to any other council members. Yeah, Charles.
Like you, Mayor Beckman, I have also served on those committees in the past, and I think it's really unfortunate that someone would accuse us of, not just doing our job and interviewing the candidates and the people that would be working with them or have worked with them to find out what's best for the advisory committees for the council. I've seen this before, and unfortunately, calling to question decisions of the council about advisory committees, I think after the fact is a political decision, not an actual, well-advised kind of discussion. And so I think that's unfortunate from my standpoint because, I think it delayed the process in the past. And I didn't really find that the reasons that the claim was made was valid, nor was the information that was shared in the past or even this time been available to all the council or anyone else. And so therefore, the very thing that's being claimed, I think, is only privy to certain people, which I had also seen on other commissions in the past. So I really don't take that to heart. I do believe it's a fair process, and I would like to see it continue. And I also feel like my fellow council members did the proper vetting, and that I would like to welcome the new commissioners to the Parks and Rec. And I'd like to thank the other ones for their service and their continued service. I mean, ultimately, it's just an advisory committee, but I would highly recommend they continue to do their exemplary service for the town. And in many ways, I find as as just someone interested in the ongoing kind of benefits of the town, you can be just as effective or more than being on council or one of the commissions. So I hope everyone understands that as well. So.
That's well put. And for what it's worth, I have personally been on all sides of this, right? I've applied to serve on boards and commissions, and I've been rejected from boards and commissions. So I know how that feels. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, me too. I didn't get the first couple times, and it just only, makes me want to do better. So, and I also understood there were reasons that, and I had animosity about it because, if you want to volunteer and they say no, it's really hard. But it was a good candidate that was picked over me, and in the end, I saw the reasoning behind it. So.
Thank you, Charles. Would anybody else like to speak? Yeah, Fred.
Yeah, I want to say I think the process we took, I think was open and it was a fair process. We modeled it after the town council interviews, and we gave everybody, 1 minute for opening. We came up with 4 questions, 3 minutes each, and then a 2-minute closing statement. Everybody got those questions, I believe, the day before. Rebecca sent them out. We also offered everyone the same thing, which was please feel free to reach out to staff or other people on the commission so that they can have insight in maybe some of the workings and all that stuff. So I think the process was fair. It was open. And I stand by the decision that I made.
Thank you, Fred. Anybody else like to speak? And if not, then we will take a motion on this item. So this is 4E1. Would anybody like to make a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve for 1E or 4E1 for appointment.
Great, thank you, Charles. Do we have a second? Fred seconds. Perfect. And Rebecca, if we could have a vote, please.
Councilmember Lee,
Yes.
Councilmember Mongan,
Yes.
Councilmember Ravazio. Oh, it's Mayor Casissa,
Yes.
Mayor Beckman.
Yes, thank you, Rebecca. And again, thanks to everybody who has served on all of our boards and commissions, past, present, and future. We really appreciate the dedication to the town and the public service. And that brings us to item 5A, which is reviewing proposed town operating budget for fiscal year 2021-2022 and providing direction to staff as appropriate. And I will turn it over to staff.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor and Town Council members. This item is the proposed budget for the upcoming fiscal year. I believe you've all received binders, which contains the information for the budget. You may notice it has a slightly different appearance than in previous years. There's tabs this time, so hopefully things can be located more easily than in the past. So the budget is divided into the general fund, and then, which is the operating budget. And then there is the capital budget, other funds, and then as a completely separate, a different agenda at the sanitary district meeting is the sanitary district. So you'll notice that the first part of the budget under overview of funds, there's a sheet summarizing every fund except for the sanitary district and a little explanation of the different funds. So regarding the operating fund, that's what we're calling the general fund here. In the financial statements, there are other funds that roll up to the general fund, but here this is just the operating fund. This general fund is what's used for all the day-to-day activities and transactions of the town. So the revenue starts, well, page 17, first of all, shows the summary of the general fund. That shows a summary of all the different revenues by major category, and then the expenditures, and then it shows the projected reserves. Then the following pages show the revenue in more detail. So I'll go over that a little bit. You can see that property tax and sales tax are the two major sources for the town's operating budget. Between the two of them, they account for about 2/3 of the revenue of the operating budget. The property tax was not at all affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. It's increased over several years. It's been steady increase. Next year, we're projecting overall a 2.5% increase, and which is about $174,000. And then sales tax was actually less affected by the COVID-19 pandemic than was anticipated, at least so far in this fiscal year. As you may recall, we had reduced the budget for, and this is the main sales tax, the 1% sales tax, not the local sales tax, which will be discussed separately, had originally been, the budget had been reduced by 40% in anticipation of closures and not being able to go into businesses and so forth, and then raised up a little bit to about just $5.5 million for this current year. But as of right now, the town has received already $5.8 million in this sales tax. That's the revenue through March 31st. So there's still another 3 months to receive before the books are closed for this fiscal year. That's more than was budgeted for the entire year. So obviously that will exceed the budget. And it's more than was received last year at this time. So this is, as far as I know, I haven't gotten the information about the most recent quarter, March 31st, but based on the information for prior quarters, has to do with online sales and with auto sales. That's the sales tax in this fund. And then most of the other revenues are stable, except for the hotel tax, transient occupancy tax. It has declined greatly during this year. The budget was greatly reduced, and it still does not look as though it will even meet the budgeted amount. So it's still, next year, I've still put in at about 50% of the pre-pandemic levels. Hopefully we'll be able to increase that at a budget revision, but right now it's showing this decline and hasn't really improved over the course of the year significantly. And then the town does anticipate receiving approximately $1.8 million in federal funds, the American Rescue Plan Act funds, half of that this year and then half next year. And so as a result of all of this, we're expecting for revenues to exceed expenditures in the operating fund by over $700,000. In terms of the expenditures, the salaries have increased by about $300,000. The salary schedule hasn't been revised. Step increases are included, and so is $99,000 in the townwide expenses section in salaries to be spent at council's discretion. And there were various staffing changes through some of the departments. In the finance department, there's a retirement of a longtime employee that's anticipated in September, and her replacement has just been hired. So there'll be a little bit of overlap there. The building department had a few changes in that the building official is now a contract position. So, temporarily at least, so it's not reflected in salaries, it's in outside services. And also there's a code enforcement position in there, and there's an assistant engineer included in the budget as opposed to a student intern, although no assistant engineer has yet been hired. Then the other big change, which of course you know about, is the pension obligation bonds, which were issued just last month to reduce the pension liability, which was $18.8 million. And the estimated savings over 15 years is approximately $12.4 million. And as you may see in the budget, there's $1,294,000 included in the budget. The actual payment is going to be $983,000. We found out, however, because the town did not pay off the entire unfunded liability, there will be an unfunded liability payment of about $300,000 required to CalPERS. So all in all, that will just be a wash. But there was a savings, because had the town not done this, the unfunded liability payment was over $1.7 million. That's what was scheduled. Outside services have increased by about $277,000, which includes the building official position that I just mentioned, and also a consultant in the recreation department in order to cover for an employee who's on leave, and then also $50,000 increase to the legal budget. $250,000 for the OPEB trust is included. That had not been in the current year fiscal budget. But right now, the OPEB trust is about 1/3 funded, and the estimated balance as of the end of this fiscal year is about $4 million. A payment of $100,000 is included for the pension trust, which there also was nothing budgeted for the current year. And that also, the anticipated balance as of the end of this fiscal year is $4 million. Fire department expenditures have increased by about $208,000, which is 4.4%. There's no increase to the salary schedule, although step increases are included, as is the equivalent of about I think it was over 2% pay increase, which can be spent at the fire council's discretion. And also added were expenditures related to the neighborhood response group and CERT, which were previously paid by the town and the city of Larkspur, but now they're just all in the Central Marin Fire Authority budget, as is $30,000 for Corte Madera services to the fire authority, but Larkspur will pay that. Increases to the county dispatch contract and the training budget, and the addition of a fire lease engine payment are included as well. And that's included, that's what that increase includes. Police expenditures have increased by about $99,000. And all in all, total expenditures have increased about $1 million compared with this year's budget. Additionally, transfers out have increased by over $500,000. This includes $300,000 to be transferred to the Park Madera Center Fund to offset some of those losses due to tenants not being able to pay rent or moving or closing their businesses, as well as about $214,000 additionally to the insurance fund to pay for property and liability insurance premiums and claims, which are expected to increase. So in total, between the expenditures and transfers out, the increase is about $1.5 million. And also on page, let's see, page 17, you'll see that the ending balance includes the reserve, the 20% reserve that was enacted by the council a few meetings ago. You'll see that the Park Madera Center deficit is less than in the current year because of that $300,000 that I just mentioned. And then the unassigned ending balance is about $3 million. So that is the operating fund. Did you want me to continue on with the capital funds or see if there were any questions about the operating budget?
Sure, let's take questions on the general fund first. So do we have any, or excuse me, on the operating budget, do we have any questions from council members for staff on the operating budget here before Daria moves on to the capital budget? All right, and if not, I guess that means you're being very clear, Daria. So thank you, and please go ahead.
All right, thank you. Okay, so the capital funds begin on page 67 of the document that you've received in the binder. And that page 67 and 68 is a little summary of the different funds that pay for projects within the capital budget. And you'll see the various projects listed. So the total capital budget, and again, this doesn't include the sanitary district, is about $10,180,000. And then more than half of that, about 5.4, nearly $5.5 million is paid for by the Corte Madera sales tax fund, the Measure F funds. There are various projects in there to be spent on capital infrastructure projects, road projects, flood control projects. Those are items that were approved by the town council, preferred by the town council, that would be spent, how this money would be spent. Additionally, in the Corte Madera sales tax fund, which is not on this spreadsheet, are things that are not capital projects per se. It's things like fire prevention, senior projects, the debt service payment for the debt that I'll discuss in just a minute, that was issued to pay for the town hall project. And one thing I would like to draw your attention to is under Parks and Recreation, you'll see it said dog park upgrades for $100,000 for Measure A parks. That project, I've learned, is actually not going to take place or be paid for with Measure A funds. Instead, it will be park bathrooms that will be constructed. I checked with the county, and they got back to me today that that was an acceptable use of those funds. So that will be changed in the next version that you receive for approval at the next meeting. So the sales tax, back to the sales tax fund, at the beginning of this year, the balance was about $9.2 million, and that was money that was accumulated over several years with the intent of spending them on capital infrastructure and these other projects. And at the end of this year, the balance is expected to be about $7.3 million. The town sales tax consultants are estimating that the town will receive about $3.5 million next year, in addition to about $3.1 million in the current year in the Measure F revenue. So in addition to all of the projects that will be paid for by the sales tax fund, there are also projects you'll see listed in the capital improvement column on page 67 and 68. Those are mainly projects that are going to be paid for by grants, or grants that have already been received and the project is in progress, or the town will be reimbursed from grants for these projects. Also included in there is revenue from Transportation Authority of Marin. Regarding the certificates of participation, the town issued this debt to finance the town hall construction that took place in just a few weeks ago. Actually, it was finalized. And the town expects to spend about $2 million on this project in the upcoming fiscal year, and then the rest of the funds later in the subsequent year. And the funds, although it says on here, there's a column for the COP proceeds, those funds will actually be held by a trustee, the Bank of New York, and that trustee will pay the bill. So it won't actually be in the town's books. Were there any, did you want me to take questions about the capital funds before moving on? There's various other funds which are smaller and are listed here.
Sure, let's see, do we have any questions from council members about the capital fund? Yeah, Leela.
Just a question about the $100,000 that's listed for dog park upgrades. So I know there's restrictions on how we can use those funds. If we didn't use the whole 100,000, for dog park or restrooms, what happens to it? Can we roll it into next year, or is that sort of time limited?
There is a time limit. We could roll it over till next year, but there is a time limit, which I don't know right off the top of my head, which I think is in a few years that we would have to spend it by. But it can be rolled over. We don't have to spend each year in that year. In the past, we had accumulated it and then used it to pay for something. Yes.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Leela. Any other questions on the capital fund? All right, and if not, go ahead, Daria.
Okay, and then the last section of this before the sanitary district are the other funds, and those are on pages 85 through 93. And then there's a description of each in the beginning of the book with the other funds. Some of these don't have any activity planned for the upcoming year. They're just included to show you that there is a balance in the fund, and someday will be spent. But one of the main funds is the insurance fund that relates to the liability and property and workers' comp coverage to the town. As I mentioned, there's an increase in premiums expected this year, and the budgeted transfer is $600,000, which is a little more than $200,000 than it was in the previous year. So that's the insurance fund. And then the Park Madera Center Fund refers to the town-owned shopping center, which generates revenue through leases to various tenants. And for many years, the debt service payment exceeded the revenue that was brought in. And so this fund was established to keep track of that, to show essentially how much the town was subsidizing the shopping center for. And then a couple years ago, that was no longer the case, that, started breaking even or even, showing a little bit of a profit. But now with, this pandemic, it has once again, been in the negative because tenants have left or been unable to pay rent. And so, as I mentioned, in order to offset some of those losses, the budget does include a $300,000 transfer from the general fund, which would come primarily from the federal funds that the town is expecting to receive. The recreation fund is also included in the other funds. And like the Park Madera Center Fund, it does roll up to the general fund in the financial statements, but it's shown separately here. It's intended to be a self-supporting fund and generates income, through classes and programs and rentals and things like that. There are some expenses that are paid by the general fund, which are included in the operating budget, essentially the director's salary and utilities, building maintenance, computers, that sort of thing. And over the past several years, the general fund has supported the recreation fund through a transfer, but at this point, it seems as though it will actually generate a small surplus both in the current year and in the following year. And one thing that I forgot to mention in the operating fund is that I did not include about $30,000 of revenue from NERA there, which I will put into the final document that's for administrative services for the town clerk and another employee. So I will include that revenue in the next version. But overall, the general fund's ending balance will increase by about $726,000 and have an ending fund balance of about $9 million, which is 44% of budgeted expenditures and transfers to other funds. And then in accordance with the reserve policy, about $4.1 million will be designated as the 20% reserve. And then we'll deduct the nearly $1.9 million from the Park Madera Center for an unassigned ending balance of approximately $3 million. The Corte Madera sales tax ending fund balance will decrease by about $3.2 million as a result of the scheduled capital projects and other expenditures and debt service payment. And we'll have about a $4.1 million balance at the end of the upcoming fiscal year, and that will include a $2.5 million reserve. And then all of the expenditures, including the $2 million for town hall construction, which actually, as I mentioned, will be paid by a trustee, are approximately $32,719,000, and that does not include the sanitary district.
Thank you so much, Daria. Any other questions from the council? Yeah, Fred.
Yeah, Daria, a great job, by the way. Totally impressed
you.
with the whole package you put together, like really
Thank you.
impressed.
Thank you.
The $300,000 for the Park Madera Shopping Center, was there $300,000 this year and then there's another $300,000 for the next fiscal year?
No, the budget only includes $300,000 in the next fiscal year, not in the current fiscal year.
Okay. And then I noticed under the Recreation Capital Fund, it shows like negative total revenue. I just wondering why that showed negative.
Yes, that was for, I think that was last year. I think that had to do with a grant that years ago, many years ago, the town was awarded a grant, and then when the state came and audited, they determined that I guess the records weren't kept properly. I'm not sure the details, but the town had to return money to the state for that grant.
Okay. And then there's a West Side Parking in Lieu Fund. What is that fund for?
That was developers paid into that in order to have park facilities on the west side of town. And in the current, I think it was the current year or maybe last year, that was expended on, I believe, like a modular classroom and restroom facilities.
Okay. Okay. And then one last question, just out of curiosity. If we didn't budget in, there's 900,000 budgeted in from getting federal funds, correct?
That's right.
If we didn't budget that 900,000 in because we're getting that money, would the budget look somewhat different, looked about the same, plus or minus?
The budget right now is showing a surplus, expected surplus next year of over $700,000. So it would have, probably nearly a $200,000 deficit, if we weren't getting that money. And
Daria, to that point, the way we're currently projected on the sales tax side of revenues for the remaining 3 months, and to the Vice Mayor's question, if we took out the American Rescue Act funds, what would you project? You wouldn't project a $200,000 or $300,000 deficit, right?
oh no, not in this year, not in this year at all. No, this year it looks like we'll have, close to a $2 million surplus. So even if we took out that, we would still have a surplus. Yeah, no, but next year, we might have a slight deficit if we didn't get that money. And if, but I'm suspecting, I don't know, I'm suspecting just the way sales tax is looking that maybe, the sales tax is a little bit conservative that I
think, Mr. Vice Mayor, I'm gonna, Daria's job is to be ultra conservative, and that's why when you go to page 17 and you look at how we've built up our trust funds to 3.5 and 4 million respectively in our OPEB and retiree, our our trust fund for pensions, and where you've seen us increase our general fund as closing statement from, think about, you look at 1920 pre-COVID, 2.3 million, and through COVID, we've been able to increase it to over $3 million with this budget. That's because she's ultra conservative. this fiscal year, we're anticipating a surplus, and that surplus potentially, you know, because we're budgeting 6 million for sales tax revenue, it's very likely it could come in at 7 million. And so when you think about the conservative numbers going into this year, this coming year, we're using ultra conservative numbers. And so even if you take out the American Rescue Act, I'm pretty confident and feel comfortable with the way I know how Daria works, that we are going to balance our budget. If we felt like if we backed out the American Rescue Act monies, that we would have a deficit, we wouldn't present this budget to you. We're being ultra conservative in the situation. I do want to point that out and be really clear on that. We also have a number of redundancies within our budget at the mid-year point if something were to happen, where we can activate those just like we did for fiscal year 2021. And we could remove $1 million from our expenditures overnight if we had to.
So thanks, I appreciate that. And I appreciate the approach that all you're taking.
Great, thank you, Fred. Great questions. I have just two quick questions that are related to Fred's questions. One, Daria, when did you say was that little mix-up with the records around that state grant for Parks and Rec?
Let me just look here very quickly. I will tell you.
Eli, I'm sorry, off the top of my head, I think that was a couple years ago, if I can remember.
Yeah, it was. Yes,
It was late 2019, I believe.
Yeah, it was. It was 2019, 2020. Yeah, so last.
Okay. Did that spur any kind of policy changes, or did that just seem like kind of a one-time thing that happens from time to time? Or
yeah, it was a one-time issue. What happened a number of years ago, the town received grant monies for the renovation of the community center that was done years ago. And we had a lot of volunteerism and we did a lot of work. And what happened was, you know, you're required to do bids and you're supposed to do a process at that amount of money being spent. And ultimately it didn't meet in an audit. It was caught and it wasn't, you know, we saved money at the time. Your staff wasn't here, it was a prior staff. But again, it didn't meet the requirements of the state. And so we had to give funds back. What we did do is we met with the state bidding, you know, rules and at the state level and did an internal audit. And basically put in a series of policies and procedures to make sure that never happened again. And we also put in a process where a specific director would never oversee a process like this. That would be always run through our public works director, who's our expert in bidding and rules with grants. And so, yes, we made major policy decisions to make sure that never happens again. It was a unique situation, as you can recall. I believe it was in like 2014, maybe. Some on this call may remember it, but it was years ago on that renovation.
That's great. Well, thank you. It sounds like that was very well handled. And then my other question was just, Daria, trying to kind of get a better understanding of what the state of the business situation at Park Madera is. So if we weren't supporting that fund right now with some of our American Rescue Plan money, would it be a big deficit? Or, you know, or does it look like rent revenue is kind of recovering there? Or how's it look?
Well, I don't know that it would be a big deficit. This year, I'm expecting that there's going to be a deficit of about $77,000, you know, not including any of those American Rescue Act funds. So that's what, you know, it looks like it's going to be this year.
Okay, but so I guess what I'm asking is that I guess that means if we're getting that big infusion from the American Rescue Plan, you know, we had been running slight surpluses before COVID. Now we're still in the recovery and we're running a small deficit even with that big infusion. So it sounds like we're not really close to recovering there in terms of the revenue coming in. Is that right?
That deficit doesn't include that infusion of money. That's for this year.
Oh.
The transfer of the $300,000 is for next year. So next year, I would anticipate that we would, right now, I was just assuming that like the same tenants were going to be there and so forth. And, you know, that everything was going to be about the same. We would have
I see.
surplus of over $236,000. But, you know, there may be other tenants or something else may happen.
Thank you. Got a little confused there. Appreciate it.
Mr. Mayor, we're also in the process of looking at some new leases. There's two potential sites to have new leases that would offset any cost too. And so really what we're doing is we're still providing some support to the smaller businesses to help them, make it through September. And so there is some support still going in on a minor deficit, but we're working hard with Keegan and Copen to fill the remaining spaces, but also try to keep 2 of the tenants that are kind of teetering on some support as we move forward.
That's great to hear. Thank you. Any other questions for staff on this from the council? And if not, we're going to open this up to public comment. So any members of the public who would like to comment on this item, please raise your hand via Zoom or email publiccomment@tcmmail.org. And I'm not seeing any hands go up. Rebecca, did we get any emailed public comments on the proposed budget?
No, we did not receive any emailed public comments on the budget.
Okay, thank you. Then seeing no hands up, we will close public comment and bring it back to the council for discussion in any direction to staff. And I think as far as I'm concerned, all I have to say is that looking at, how strong a financial position our town is in, given everything that we've just gone through, I am so impressed. I think it really speaks volumes. I think the council gets some credit, but I really think it speaks volumes to the diligence of our staff, in really working with us and helping to make sure that everything, like Todd said, that we're being ultra conservative, because I think we all agree that when it's public funds, that's the only option. You got to be as conservative and be as good a steward as possible. And I think you guys have just done such a fantastic job, keeping Corte Madera's head above the water this whole past year. So hats off to you guys, and I'm so grateful. That's all I have to say. Would anybody else like to make any comments? Yeah, Fred, and then Leela.
Yeah, I too appreciate staff. I think it's a solid budget. I think we're fortunate for the financial position that we've been in. And I kind of look back at thanking other town councils in the past that had the foresight to start getting conservative, setting up reserve funds, because sometimes things take a while, but I think we're at that position now because of all that work that's been done in the past. So I really appreciate that. The one thing I'd like to see, if it's possible, Todd, I'll direct this towards you, is in the package that was sent out, there's a list of accomplishments by, I think, each department. And when you read those individually, they're impressive. Put them all together, they're even more impressive. Somehow, I think you guys need to see how you can push those out onto the town's website, because I think you guys should be getting credit for all the work you do. And you kind of you're in the background a lot of times, but it was just truly impressive just on, again, the accomplishments in the last fiscal year. Totally impressed. So thanks for all the hard work.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Great. And Leela?
I just wanted to echo the appreciation for staff that you and Vice Mayor Casissa mentioned, and also appreciation for the clarity with which you've made your presentation and this booklet. I'm a new council member and really read through things really carefully and really appreciated the amount of work that went into this so that we could really understand it.
Thank you.
Yeah, to further Fred, maybe the Marin IJ can talk about all the great successes that you were able to accomplish in the last year, but my fear is that all the other towns will get super jealous. But also just great work, and there's a page that really talks about everybody that's been involved in putting together the successful budget of this last year and then how it translates to the next year. And I just wanted to reiterate, I truly believe that was it. I think this was conservative, and I do like the conservative approach, and then be surprised that we did even better than the conservative approach. But outside of that, I think that there's a lot of robust programs that you're going to be able to accomplish in this next year. I didn't feel like we're really cutting it out. I feel like there's a lot of them, and there's even potential for more going down the road, but knowing how to stagger them throughout budgets and knowing that, there's a 5-10 year plan for a lot of these things, and knowing how much we actually get out of those instead of trying to get in front of the horse is another kind of unsung part of this that if you really look at all those lines and really read it, I think that's one of the ways that it's succeeding that isn't so clear. So.
That's a really good point, Charles, because it's yes, we are building up our reserve funds, which is absolutely the right move. But apart from that, it's yeah, we learned our lesson in 2008. But apart from that, it's not like Corte Madera is squirreling away this money and just sitting on it. It's that what we're doing is continuing full speed ahead, delivering a really aggressive capital improvement program of services and projects for residents. So, I mean, it's just incredible to see how, COVID's barely put a ding in our progress on this. So as Charles and Fred and Leila said, just really incredible. Any other comments from council members? I think it sounds like the direction so far is a glowing endorsement. Any other comments on this item? All right. If not, then Todd, do you feel like that's a clear enough direction?
Thank you so much, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. Appreciate the comments, and Daria, great job. Really appreciate your presentation as always. Yes.
Great. Thank you, guys. That concludes 5A and brings us to item 5B, which is consideration and possible introduction of ordinance number 1007, which is related to administrative citations, fines, and appeals. And I will turn it over to staff.
Good evening, I'm Mayor Beckman, council members. I am actually going to give the staff report on this item. We are asking for your approval of introduction of the administrative citation ordinance. By way of background, the town currently has an administrative citation ordinance, but it is limited only to property related violations. So what this ordinance does is it allows for administrative citation for any violation of the Muni Code. It also updates the procedures for citations for property related matters. There's been some changes in the law since a prior ordinance was passed. So we took this opportunity to do some updating and some cleanup. It's a complicated ordinance, mostly because the state law requires a complicated ordinance. Just by way of background, a number of years ago, the state decriminalized traffic tickets. They used to be infractions, and they made them essentially administrative citations. If you get a parking ticket, you're issued a citation, you either pay the fine or you can challenge it and get a hearing to contest it. The process worked well, and local government said, hey, we'd like to be able to do that too. So the state passed a statute allowing local governments to do that. So what this really does is it gives another tool for enforcement. It doesn't change the town's philosophy around obviously working with its residents to get compliance before citing. It's not an attempt to be heavy-handed. It's just another tool. This would allow free up Central Marin Police to concentrate on bigger issues and allow the town to enforce on some of these smaller matters. So essentially, state law requires two processes. If the code violation relates to building, electrical, plumbing, any kind of structural problem, state law says, well, you need to give people the opportunity to correct, which makes sense. So our ordinance will say you get a notice of violation from the code enforcement officer, tells you what's wrong, what needs to be fixed, get a certain amount of time to fix it. The code enforcement officer will return and inspect, and if the matter's corrected, then the notice of violation goes away and everyone is fine. Otherwise, staff has the authority to issue an administrative citation. For other types of code violations, violating the off-leash dog ordinance, for example, or the noise ordinance or park use rules, you don't have to give the notice to correct because there isn't really anything to correct. The officer would just have the discretion to issue the citation, and then the person either pays the fine or can request a review for a hearing. And then state law kind of requires two separate tracks for hearings. State law requires for building, plumbing, electrical code violations, a local appeals board has to hear the matter. Can't be a single officer, but for all the other types of violations, a single hearing officer can hear it. And these are informal hearings. No one needs to have a lawyer. You come, you present your evidence, you can question the code enforcement officer. Formal rules of evidence don't apply, but due process is granted to everyone. You have notice, you have an opportunity to present your side, to contest it. After the hearing is finished, the hearing officer or the local appeals board is going to issue a decision. That decision is considered final for purposes of administrative review. The only appeal then is that someone would have to go to Superior Court to challenge it. And under these rules, it's a very short time clock for doing that. So that's how the process is set up. And again, this is another tool for the town to have to enforce some of these. I've talked to staff. I think there are some policy decisions for staff in terms of implementation of the ordinance, whether there'll be a warning first. Obviously, town will give notice to all residents that the enforcement process is going to start. So all folks have an opportunity to understand that if in fact they've been violating the law, time to stop doing it. But that's essentially the procedure. We've followed state law, and we've tried to ensure we have compliance. And in terms of the actual mechanics, if you want to contest the hearing, you have to do it within 30 days. You don't pay you're not subject to late fees or any penalties for requesting the hearing. You do have to give a deposit, but if it's a financial hardship, you can apply for a waiver of the deposit. And then if you win before the hearing officer, you get everything back. So we're being very careful here to ensure that everybody's rights are respected. That's a brief overview. I'm happy to answer any questions that any council members may have.
Great, thanks so much, Amy. Do we have any questions for staff? Yeah, Fred.
Yeah, I got a few, sorry. I think on the administrative side, I think it says that the town manager will find an impartial hearing officer. What does that look like if I get hit with my dog being off leash and I go to contest it? Does that mean the town manager finds somebody within the town, outside of the town? What does it look like?
Yeah, it can be an employee of the town. It simply has to be someone who is not involved in the citation. Sometimes there are reciprocal understandings. One thing to consider is whether Corte Madera and its sister city, Larkspur, want to do an exchange. But due process, it is allowed to be an employee. It just can't be anyone who's involved in the citation because you want fairness.
Okay. And then if I do go before either an administrative hearing or I want to say the other type that has to do with building, are those public hearings that anybody can attend? Or is it just between the appeals board or the impartial person and a person who's got hit with a citation?
The hearing officer is not a public meeting because it's a single hearing officer. The local appeals board is really an appellate body, but it is formally created. So it would be similar to if you were going to go before the planning commission and, seek a conditional permit or seek to overturn the zoning administrator. One thing I should say is in this ordinance, we create a local appeals board of 1 member from city council and 2 from planning, because state law requires that they have some technical background, and we think we'll get those from this pool. I will say that I believe I'm correct on this. I believe Adam told me in the last 5 years, there's actually never been an appeal of building, because I think I have to say I'm kind of still being new to Corte Madera, blown away with how hard staff work with residents to help them get into compliance. So again, I don't anticipate this is going to be like a floodgate of appeals. We've already had this in the law, that piece in the law. So I just don't see that as being a major change. Yeah, so that appeals body would meet only as needed. It isn't anticipated to be a big time commitment because again, we haven't had any in 5 years. So I can't imagine we're going to have a ton.
Okay, so it sounds like if there was a hearing, which hopefully there's not, because it looks like track record shows it, but you never know. It would be something where the town would have to notice saying there's a public hearing. And
right, it would just be called, and they would meet just as needed. So we'd notice a special meeting, and due process requires, obviously, we give notice to the person who's appealing in timely fashion. So everyone will have an opportunity.
Okay, and then the fines, are those attached to the person or are they attached to a property depending on which side of the fence you're on? And I'm asking because I think there's a thing in here where if I get a fine, I don't pay. I think it's a 1% penalty every month. But it dawned on me, what happens if I never pay and I move out of town?
The ordinance allows for late fees to accumulate, and we then can file a collection action against a resident. We cannot, there's a new case that came out just in the past couple years that just says we cannot put a property lien on administrative fines, but we can file a civil action if we need to. So we would collect it like any other debt to the city.
Okay.
And again, I mean, the fines aren't meant to be particularly punitive. They could be. What we've done is we've taken the fines from the state statute for infractions and used them. Some towns have higher fines, but the policy decision for staff at least was, let's just do what you would do for an infraction. I mean, the idea really is compliance, not particularly punitive fines.
Okay. And then I'm sorry, last question, it may
Sure.
sort of both of you. What's the timeliness and what's the process on Wednesday to get it implemented? I know we discussed it tonight. It may have to go through town council twice. And then when are you looking, Todd, at implementing? Is it going to be, I guess, pushed out on the website? In other words, public notification.
So, I mean, it does require 2 readings, and then it won't be in effect till 30 days after, but there's definitely some work that needs to be done in terms of coming up, updating our forms, citation forms, and so forth. So there will be a little, and also training of staff, I think is going to be very important to ensure we have fair and impartial enforcement. So there is going to be a little bit of a rollout, but I know that Mr. Moriarty can probably speak to this, but he intends definitely a notice requirement to residents and so forth.
Okay, I guess I'm looking at the public awareness / public education part of it.
Yeah, if I could just add, Mr. Vice Mayor, that we intend to spend some time. We want to pass this new ordinance, but there's some work to be done here, and that's creating an official warning, carbon copy warning, and start to track warnings. What's rolling out parallel to this with our code enforcement officers, we've recently purchased an Axon body camera. It's similar to what the current Central Marin police officers wear, and it's just going to record interactions with the public. And so it'll be a safeguard for the town, for the code enforcement officer, and an actual record of evidence of what transpired on the date in question. So we need to establish and roll out policy with its application as well. And just as a reminder, we brought this to you today as a direct request from the council to have a more appropriate enforcement method as opposed to relying exclusively on Central Marin Police Authority. Their staff is tasked with a variety of law enforcement related calls for service. And as we've slowly built up our code enforcement staff, we hope to increase and encompass more services for our town and our community. Nothing here has changed our philosophy on the way how we do business. We will continue to educate and to encourage positive behavior. An administrative citation is going to be obviously a last course resort, and something that is only designed to correct behavior. Our intention is not to fine people. We want to change behavior. We want to stop the dogs off the leashes. We want to prevent multiple reoccurrences of the same type of offenses. This will be, common application will be dogs off the leash, which you all are very well aware of in many public discussions, gas leaf blowers, some noise issues, and we'll evaluate if we need to make additional changes down in the future. But at least it provides us, as from a staff level, an ability to start an enforcement action and it not impact the court system.
Okay, thanks. And I appreciate that. And I appreciate the approach where it's not the gotcha type thing, but it's more the educational and changing the behavior. So thanks for that.
Of course.
Great, thank you, Amy and Mike, and thank you, Fred. Great questions. Any other questions from council members on this? And if not, we're going to go ahead and open this up to public comment. So if you'd like to comment on this item, please go ahead and raise your hand via Zoom or email publiccomment@tcmmail.org. And I'll ask Rebecca if we got any emailed public comments on this ordinance.
I did not receive any emailed comments on the ordinance.
Great, thank you. And I'm not seeing any hands up, so we will close public comment and bring it back to the council for discussion. And Amy, do we need a motion on this, or is this just an introduction?
We need a vote, a motion.
Okay,
vote.
sounds good. So we'll be entertaining a motion to introduce this ordinance. I think my only comments are just that I think, you know, as Fred's questions really got to, I think this is kind of what, you know, I think justice reform looks like at the local level, right? And it's things like having a pre-citation warning, having an appeals opportunity that's clearly defined, is setting up this due process that's really simple, that doesn't require residents who may get caught up in it to have to be spending money on lawyers and things like that. I think it's fantastic. So I just want to thank the staff for the work that went into this. Any other comments from council members? Yeah, Leela.
I just wanted to say I'm glad to hear there will be some like working out of policy in terms of how this actually gets enacted. I think it's correct that it allows discretion to the citation officer, that we don't have to have zero tolerance and issue citations automatically. But I do think that discretion, we have to be careful how we exercise that and make sure that it's exercised in a fair manner. So I'm glad to hear that we'll sort of flesh that out with policy.
Good point, Leela. Thank you. Any other comments? And if not, we'll take a motion. Yeah, Fred.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and make the motion.
Thank you, sir. Do we have a second?
I'll
Charles. Thank you, sir. Rebecca, could we have a vote, please?
Councilmember Lee,
Yes.
Councilmember Mongan,
Yes.
Councilmember Ravazio,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Casissa,
Yes.
Mayor Beckman.
Yes, thank you very much. That brings us to our business items. Our business item of the night is 6A, discussion and direction to staff regarding possible preparation of an appeal to ABAG MTC regarding our RENA numbers, our required housing numbers, and I'll turn it over to staff.
Good evening, Mayor and council members. This is an item I'm bringing tonight before you, really at the beginning of what is now, we're formally in the eligible sort of time period for filing appeals to the regional housing needs allocation numbers that ABAG has assigned to each jurisdiction in the Bay Area and to Corte Madera, including Corte Madera. On essentially the point in time, and I'll get into this, I have a short presentation, or a relatively short presentation, to talk about RENA, what it is, and also just get into the appeal process itself. But essentially, on May 20th, the ABAG Executive Board, they approved the final RENA methodology, which was the process, and the council may remember we commented on the process, the RENA methodology. There was a committee set up over the course of the last 18 months to develop how these housing units, the 440,000 housing units that the state assigned to the Bay Area, would be distributed amongst the jurisdictions. And so that methodology was approved by the ABAG Executive Board on May 20th, which then rolled into the approval of the appeals procedures on May 25th. So here we are, June 1st, we're started at that May 25th date, started a 45-day period in which jurisdictions could file appeals to their RENA. So we're sort of at the beginning of that time period, and RENAs must, the appeals must be filed by July 9th, which is not too far off, but does allow some time for discussion, some questions, and also I thought it might be a good time to sort of, as I mentioned, just rehash the RENA process and what it is. So, Staff is looking for some direction from council this evening, here to answer any questions that you may have about it. And obviously it would take some time to prepare an appeal if that's the direction that the council decides that it would like to go. So I wanted to get this out in advance. We'll have the discussion at this meeting. So with that, let me share my screen. Let's see, share screen one. I'm gonna try to. And are you able to see that? I'm not sure if you're seeing it. Is it full screen view?
No.
We just need to, we need to see it in presentation mode. Yeah, there you go.
And are you seeing, let's see, well, that works for now. You seeing the full screen view now?
Not exactly. We're seeing like a preview
think
of the
your
next slide
notes.
as well.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out how to change that, but I'm not able to change that. Well, it's not my notes, but anyways, this is really a template. I'll just roll from here. It's not really, basically ABAG has provided sort of a deck, a template deck for us to communicate some of the basics of the process to all of you in our community as well. And this is really sort of the basis. The numbers, as many of you know, form the basis of our discussion and sort of the kickoff of the housing element process. Once we have our numbers, we move right into sort of planning and making sure that we have planned for adequate sites and zoned properly to accommodate the total number of units over the next 8 years. So basically, as most of you know, RHNA has been around for a while. Again, that's the RHNA, Regional Housing Needs Allocation. Identifies the total number of units across all income groups, which is important to note, for which the region must plan for the 8-year RHNA cycle, and then all jurisdictions as well must plan for that cycle. So we're currently in the 2014 to 2022 cycle. And then the next cycle, the 6th cycle, will be 2023 to 2031. And as I mentioned, we must, the last bullet here, update the housing element of the general plan to show how it plans to accommodate its share of regional need and housing needs. It's based on statutory objectives, which are laid out for you here. The state has required RHNA and this sort of housing policy approach in order to accomplish these things as laid out in the statute. Increasing housing supply, promoting infill development and socioeconomic equity, promote improved intra-regional jobs housing relationships, and balance disproportionate household income distributions. Also recently added was the requirement to affirmatively further fair housing. And as you'll see in this last, not only state legislation required it, but also in the methodology itself, equity and income inequality were big factors and criteria on which the distribution was ultimately approved by the ABAG Executive Committee. Some of the reasons for that are based on sort of the past performance in terms of housing production and housing production amongst the various different income groups. So this shows essentially in the current RHNA and the last couple RHNA cycles, doing fairly well at the above moderate income groups and the market rate housing, but less so on the very low income and low income housing unit production. Also important to note that you can see the tremendous sort of increase in the need that the State Department of Housing and Community Development has actually assigned to the Bay Area. So it's jumped almost 2.5 times from the last RHNA cycle to this RHNA cycle up to this 441,000 number, which, as I'll get into, is the primary driver, I think, of the real significant increases in what we're going to have to plan for in this upcoming 1.5 years in preparation for the 2023 to 31 cycle.
Hey, Adam, quick question on that
Yes,
on
absolutely.
that big jump in the total need. Do you know, is that a jump that's being seen statewide, or is that more the result of you know, the state and ABAG MTC deciding that a lot more of this housing needs to be happening in the Bay Area specifically?
No, it's statewide, and it is not, and this is, I think, an important distinction. It's not it's not derived from any coordination with ABAG or any of the regional governing bodies. The Southern California Association of Governments, they've just also, they're about a year and a half ahead of us. And so they just went through a similar significant jump in the number of units they have to plan for as well. So it's coming from state projections, which, you know, frankly, we're pre-pandemic and pre some of the things we've recently seen, but that's how long-range planning works. It's, you have variations in the short term, but they're planning for basically long-term growth.
Got it. Thank you.
Just to point out where we are in the process, I talked about in the red, the allocation methodology. We've been through that process. The draft allocation in the orange is where we are now. Was just released on May 25th, the draft allocation. And so we're at the point where we're able to get into the appeal process. I already went through that. Final allocation is at the end of, oh, sorry. Was that somebody?
Should be taken care of.
Okay. The final allocation, and then that happens at the end of 2021 after any appeals are handled. And then, as I mentioned, we're going to be updating on our housing element to accommodate and plan for the RHNA numbers that we receive. And that that housing element update actually is something that goes to the state and not to ABAG. So just to clarify, there's two, we have regional governments, and the state government. So it's, we will be updating our housing element, and as we've done the last time, we send it to state HCD, and they are the ones that ultimately would certify that we're in compliance with housing law. Just to move on, this is a little bit more on the actual methodology process. We can go quickly through it. Really just to say it's happened since you started in October 2019 with a committee. Attachment 1 of the staff report provided some background on this, and also that was at the time in October of 2020 when the council authorized the mayor to essentially write a letter on the draft methodology at that time that was being implemented. And as you know, the council at that time had some concerns about the way that the methodology was being proposed. This is just, I'm not going to go through this just to show it was a complex formula, but one of the other things to note is that if you can see my cursor, both of the sort of lower income units and the upper income units, or the moderate and above moderate, one of the first criteria was to sort of allot proportions, or a significant proportion of the units to high opportunity areas. This was sort of the equity criteria that I mentioned before, in trying to ensure that more units were being built in areas that had higher, they're actually, it's a defined term, actually, higher opportunity areas, things with higher educational outcomes, health outcomes, things like that. And there was also an equity adjustment at the end that sort of skewed it as well towards some of the areas that were did not see as much development of lower income units in the past housing cycles. So ultimately that ended up in this distribution of units throughout the Bay Area. And you can see sort of the output of that formula ended with the distribution of number of units, again, for this 8-year planning cycle. A 3% increase in the number of units for Marin. You can focus it on Marin here, but I can come back to this if need be. This is actually now drilled down a little deeper on what this means for all the Marin County jurisdictions. And many of the local communities around us of similar sizes all have very sort of roughly equal numbers in terms of we're at 725, which is right, that's the same as Sausalito, 724, San Anselmo with even more, and you could see Mill Valley and Larkspur had almost 1,000. So the appeals process essentially is why we're the discussion piece this evening. And I wanted to just clarify something that I actually stated incorrectly in the staff report. The only entities that can file an appeal are actually a jurisdiction, so a city or a county, or HCD. And so that what is new about it this year, I think in the staff report, I also said groups or even individuals, and I just want to clarify that that's not the case. It is new, however, that other jurisdictions may appeal another city's RENA, and as well as HCD may also appeal a jurisdiction's RENA. So that's actually something that is new for this cycle and this appeal process. I've mentioned the major steps in the appeal process. This is actually drilling down a little bit more into the timeline for appeals. And you'll see that it's a pretty involved process. It's a formal appeals process. So I said by July 9th, and I also attached to the staff report, there are specific forms that need to be submitted and obviously developed and submitted. And then there's a comment period to August 30th. There are formal public hearings to consider appeals and the comments received. And then there's the final determinations on each appeal, and the final RENA is then approved by ABAG. The appeals do go to ABAG, which is the regional government, as you know. So it is heard by ABAG itself. There are specific reasons and only certain reasons under which an appeal can be filed. Those are listed here. And I did, basically these top three, the number threes here. One, if ABAG failed to adequately consider information submitted in the local jurisdiction survey. And there's actually some interesting factors in here that could be considered, which I'm happy to go into more detail, but there is one about that I mentioned the staff report as well, in terms of local factors and environmental constraints, such as the amount of land in the FEMA flood area that FEMA recognizes is not protected by any FEMA approved levy. Also, water is another factor that could be considered under number one. Two is the ABAG did not determine the jurisdiction's allocation in accordance with its adopted methodology and in a manner that furthers and does not undermine the RENA objectives. That's a very challenging one, I would just note, just because the ABAG has approved that methodology. HCD has in fact endorsed ABAG's methodology and provided that feedback to ABAG staff, and has actually essentially said that the methodology does not only meets RENA objectives, but they has some praise for the way that the methodology was actually conducted by ABAG. And then three, a significant or unforeseen change in circumstances has occurred in the local jurisdiction or jurisdictions that merits revision of information submitted as part of the local jurisdiction survey. Those are the specific reasons that you can file an appeal under, and then you have to provide all of this information as well as part of the appeal. So again, just obviously a lot of information needs to be provided, evidentiary information, and is part of the appeal. This is information I think I also included in the staff report that just talks about what's happened recently in terms of the appeals. I mentioned the Southern California Area of Governments in 2000. They just went through this process, I guess just last fall, I believe. So they had 48 appeals, 2 were partially upheld by their regional government. I don't know how telling this really is, but it's just information to consider that Sacramento didn't have any appeals in their in 2020, and San Diego regional government had only 4 appeals, 1 partially upheld. Information about the hearing procedures and the structure of the hearing. I think mostly just letting you know again that it's a fairly formal process, and that importantly, even if the appeal is upheld, it doesn't mean that those units go away. Those units then just get distributed to other jurisdictions in the region. So that 440,000 number will never change as part of this process. Some may get shifted around from different jurisdictions to other areas in the region, but they don't go away. So I think that's another important consideration. And that's really, this is getting more into housing element compliance, which we'll talk about more when we get into the housing element process. But the focus tonight, again, just really on really whether council feels it would be appropriate for staff to pursue a potential appeal of our RENA numbers. And again, that is 725 units. And I think I did have the breakdown. I'll just go back to that slide. That's the breakdown for Corte Madera: 213 very low income units, 123 low income, 108 moderate, and 281 above moderate income units, for a total of 725. And it may be worth noting, at the time of the council did publicly comment on the methodology back in October, our units were at 710. So in fact, and I think the concern at that time was that it was not adequately really, the basis for the methodology was based off of, should be based off on actual population growth rather than total population. And that actually did not end up succeeding in reducing the number of units at that time allocated to Corte Madera through that methodology. We're slightly above. It didn't really change it much, but it actually went up to 725. So with that, I'm happy to take some, thank you for your patience. And I just thought it was important to get into this a little bit more in depth, as I think we'll be hearing a lot more about this in the coming weeks and months. But happy to answer any questions you may have and take it from there.
Thank you, Adam. Yeah, Todd.
I had one other thing, and I just want to really thank Adam. We're lucky we have him and keeping us, on track monitoring this issue. I want to share my screen for a second, because something that really jumped out at me when Adam first brought this kind of appeal process up, and I think the odds of winning an appeal are very unlikely. That's clear. However, it didn't stop us from, telling our story in Corte Madera. It wasn't about growth. It was about our uniqueness in Corte Madera back in, I believe, the end of last year, which appeared to fall on deaf ears. But something we didn't stop doing, we continue to do the work of Corte Madera on the climate adaptation assessment. So I want to share my screen. Can you all see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry. See if I can get my technology going here. Okay, I'm not able to. Here we go. Okay, so this is page 35 of our recent climate adaptation assessment. It's something that really jumped out at me when we told the story in writing. We didn't give a visual, and so this is scientific data. This is conversations that we've had at the state level. You know, 87% of our community, as we talked about it, is in the FEMA floodplain or in the high-risk fire zone, red being fire, blue being FEMA. And so take a look at that. So the gray are the only neighborhoods that are not in either. And so we are heavily impacted by that. And so our focus, obviously, by our assessment is to how do we protect our infrastructure moving forward. And so we're focused on it. But when we talk about this RENA conversation and the appeal process that they put in place, as Adam said, one of them really has to focus on sea level rise and FEMA flood zones. Well, as you can see here, I think we have a good argument for discussion, for some consideration. And I don't know that Adams, I haven't asked him yet, and so I don't want to put him on the spot publicly. I don't know that he definitely necessarily recommends that we focus on both, but I think there's a strong argument for it. But at a minimum, we may want to focus on the floodplain conversation. And I think it is worth consideration of the council, as you can see in the visual, to tell our story through our assessment of the climate adaptation assessment. And with that, I will stop and turn it back over to the council for discussion.
Great, thank you, Todd. And we will start with questions from council members. Any questions? Yeah, Fred.
Yeah, so Todd, based upon what you and Adam were saying, it sounds like the only thing we could really appeal on would be the environmental aspect, as far as either on the flood side, sorry, or on the WUI areas.
Let's see. I'm happy to answer that, Councilmember Casissa. So if you can see my screen here, the appeals, this actually lays out exactly the appeals may be brought on one of the following 3 grounds, and this is from ABAG. So the, I think certainly B2 is what Todd was just referring to, and so it really speaks directly to the availability of land suitable for urban development or for conversion to residential use, and so on. And then at the last sentence talks about the determination of available land suitable for urban development may exclude lands where the FEMA has determined that the flood management infrastructure designed to protect that land is not adequate to avoid the risk of flooding. So that's sort of a basis point that is already eligible. That, I think it's the most direct. The environmental constraints that are unique to Corte Madera, maybe if the council wants to pursue this, I think we're saying that's where we would recommend focusing attention. Certainly, there are other items here that I think we've raised in the past, but may not be as convincing or credible if we raise those, and that's just my opinion. But I think Todd and I are both focused on that one as sort of the most direct point to sort of raise if the decision is made to go with an appeal.
Okay, so you think in your mind, I want to say that would be a valid appeal chance type thing to go on? I mean, it seems like the only one that we would qualify for.
Yeah,
I don't mean to put you on the spot, by the way.
Well, the other one that sort of occurred, obviously, I think currently right now also MMWD is looking at things that looking at water restrictions for new connections and whatnot. That's obviously a temporary moratorium if that goes ahead. But that's B1, talks about lack of capacity of sewer or water service due to federal state laws, regulations or regulatory actions and so on. So we don't know what's happening there yet. I think it's hard to say. You have to appeal based on actually that it would affect the planning period, so 2023 to 31, which is obviously a couple of years out. So we're not in a great position to make a sort of a case there, but obviously if MMWD was to go forward with a moratorium and they've talked about water restrictions and drought, I think it's that would be something we could obviously put in there as well. I think it's very hard to say what's credible, what's not, how ABAG is going to hear appeals. A lot of it, you may have other council members who have been through other rounds and have sort of given, it has more of a perspective on past experience trying to get through to ABAG. But I also want to point out, there are other jurisdictions that are as well are going to be similar positions as Corte Madera. So it's very hard to say at all what the results might be or what's credible and what's not. So I hesitate to actually go that far, but it's certainly the basis is there for what Todd just talked about and what I just mentioned.
I will say too, I don't feel like we're throwing things at the wall either. I feel like they didn't, our letter fell on deaf ears like I think all the letters did. I think the likelihood's low, but I think still Corte Madera has a story to be told. And it's not just what we think, we've done the analysis. Not very many jurisdictions in the state of California have done what we've done, put the effort into it of trying to understand our, how we're impacted just as a town with climate change and what we're trying to do about it. And so I do think we have a really unique story with documentation to support it. And so I do think it is worthwhile.
Okay. And then another question also is not, I want to say what's the cost to appeal, but the cost, I mean, does staff have the bandwidth if we did move forward with an appeal? Would you need to bring in consultants and, would we need to get legal fees involved also? And again, I know from staff's point of view, maybe not hard dollars on any of those three, but just to get a rough idea overall, again, time and who would be involved.
I think it's.
I'll let you go. I'll let you go.
Yeah, I mean, Adam's our expert. I'll just tell you, as your town manager, I just feel like we're about to go into a really, this 10-year process is important. We got to get it right, and I think this is an issue. And I feel like they put this process in place for a reason. I feel like we fall within the process, and I feel like we have an obligation to consider it. And so, staff, as a town manager, will direct our resources accordingly within the budget you just looked at. To make it happen. And yeah, it affects staff time. I mean, I have to pull Adam and his team away from some other things, but I think, we're about to spend a lot of time on our work plan when we talk about it in September on housing. And so I think we owe it to ourselves to, this is the first step. We got to understand what our numbers are at the end of the day and then deliver them. So I think it's important. And so, and I know Adam, luckily we have a resident expert. And so, but whatever Adam needs for support, we do have the capability to provide that for him.
Okay. And I'll make an assumption, but if you can just verify that, I think the deadline is July 9th or so to get this in. So we would have to decide tonight, or because otherwise if we decide the next meeting, it gives you like less than 3 weeks.
Yeah, we need to know. We need to know.
Thanks.
Great, thank you, Fred. Any other questions for staff? Let's go Leela, then Charles.
Thanks, just a quick one. So the fact that if there's a successful appeal, the numbers aren't reduced, they're just like reallocated. So that means that 725 might not be our final number. If somebody else has a successful appeal, then they could actually add more units to that.
Yeah. And that's true. I don't know how likely that is. I think the other thing that points out is we actually need to start our planning for whether it's 725, whether it's 760, whether it's 600. We actually have to start the process for planning and having some community engagement around what that looks like without knowing the final number. So we need to start that in the next couple of months. Or a few months. So regardless of what the final number comes out, we have to use this, I think, as sort of the best guess, best estimate that we have. I mean, it's sort of unfortunate the way the process works, where we won't know the final numbers until the end of the year, but we have to really start the process, like I said, toward this summer. And so we don't know.
That, do we decrease the chances that our number will go up by filing an appeal? I just can imagine if somebody else files an appeal and we don't, does that suggest that we're perfectly happy with 725? Or do you have any sense of how that's viewed?
No. No, I don't. I really don't. I think ABAG would tell you that's not what it's based on, right? Each one is. They stand behind their methodology, and if somebody has a credible appeal, they'll listen to it, and if things need to be reallocated, they will. But I think that's one of the reasons why it's somewhat unlikely is that shifting around too much would create sort of fall out for jurisdictions who are planning for one thing and then get a drastically different number. It might create problems, unforeseen problems down the road. And so anyways, it's really hard to say how this will work.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you guys. Charles?
So we've had drought, what, 7 years out of the last 10? So long-term planning, I think, can acknowledge that ultimately what our cap is showing and other metrics is ultimately leading to depleted water resources. Not only that, but even if we were able to meet capacity, we're still limited because we provide all our water from lakes here, and it's not like we have giant reservoir systems that can, support millions of people, right? Like Alameda and stuff like that. So I would like to see more of those numbers and those discussions, because I haven't. I think it might affect a larger swath of us. The other thing is that, have we talked to RJ? Like ultimately our sewer district too, we can do, pump more stuff down the line, but ultimately what's the capacity for the region? And like, are we able to actually reasonably, allocate to those numbers as a smaller kind of municipality? And if not, how do they, how we're just supposed to figure it out, and that just becomes our cost. The other one I have is, my fear, and I think the fear of a lot of people, and I've talked about this personally, and I looked at the numbers, right? Like, what does 700 units look like? How many square foot is a small unit? 400 square feet, right? It's still an enormous footprint. So not only do we have 80% of the land that, it's more dangerous, more expensive, then there's a huge part that's already private ownership, single family housing. And then the areas that are gray are the 20%, almost all of it was single family up on the hills, right? So we're not talking about the areas that are commercial, right? But the commercial can lift it up, but, and so another one is ultimately, they don't care about urban fabric. So my fear is it's going to be like the apartment complex in Emeryville, or, other things that just jut out as, because we're just restricted by land overall, and especially these things. So, I think that I wish I had I understand that you can understand it from zones and areas and environmental controls, right? WUI and stuff like that. But I think there's that infrastructural one might actually have something to it, but I didn't see any metrics, and just saying that it doesn't exist. If you can't point to a piece of paper that showed me where that study happened, it's hard for me to buy into, because I really do think we have limited capacity unless there's future planning for that type of stuff to take on 700 units, not alone all the other municipalities around us. So that's my question to you, is do you feel the same way, or ultimately has staff had that discussion internally and it just isn't, you've just written the report to go to what you think is the the golden goose? And then the other one is, have you been talking to other agencies, and ultimately can this be that it is a regional issue, that there are a lot of other agency, Larkspur, for example, is affected by a lot of the same constraints, and ultimately we can also then appeal on their behalf, and that there's, that's another question I had for you, if there was a discussion of that. And
yeah, I could speak to some of that. So MMWD does have long-term planning documents, and they've been discussing those recently as well. I did speak with their staff, and they stand by their long-term projections that they can accommodate growth. Obviously, there's interruptions and things change, and they have to reevaluate long-term plans as well, as we've talked about with our climate adaptation assessment. These are living documents, but they did a 2020 plan, that can accommodate sort of the consistent with the Plan Bay Area, which is another Bay Area regional plan. So, we're not going to speak for them, but they're certainly available, and we can bring some information, or even bring, they've been in front of the council, but we can bring the information that they supply their board as well to the council and to our residents. And I'm sure when we go out and talk about housing element numbers and planning for the growth, that's going to be one of the major conversation pieces we're going to have to discuss. And so we're starting to think about how to prepare for that and who to bring to the table.
I mean, ultimately the discussion goes to desalination. So then that brought up one of the other questions I had for this is ultimately more sewage and more water pulled out of the ocean, it makes more saline oceans, right? And ultimately are the RENA numbers bound by CEQA or any kind of impact that they would have on the area around adjacent? Like, you know, ultimately you can build a giant skyscraper, but if it blocks out the sun and kills the forest, like, you know, like how'd you let that happen? So
yeah, they are, but again, those are discussions more for, I think, pushing back on the 441 or the methodology, which we've done and we've talked about as well. Those are larger, broader discussions about how much as a region we should be planning for growth. You know, I think we can also have it at the local level and bring up local factors. But if it's, you know, a broader discussion about all the impacts that this is going to cause, those sorts of arguments, well, I think we can talk about them in an appeal, are not going to, you know, I don't think those are going to meet the criteria under which we're allowed to bring those.
That's fine. Those are my concerns, and that's why they're questions. They're not direction, right?
Yeah,
I appreciate that.
All right, thank you, Charles. Any other questions from council members? My only question was on the actual mechanics of a potential appeal. You mentioned that jurisdictions can appeal other jurisdictions' numbers. Can jurisdictions, you know, join together as multiple parties to the same appeal? So what I'm wondering, and this is maybe far-fetched, but I'm just thinking about, like, in terms of if we wanted to pursue an appeal in a way that had a potentially lower impact on staff time, could we, you know, like, band together with other local jurisdictions that are in similar situations like Sausalito or other ones that are like half flood zone, half fire zone, and submit kind of a joint appeal? Do you know if that's a thing?
I don't know why they sort of that idea though couldn't work if that was something that other jurisdictions wanted to participate in. But I imagine you still have to submit something individually. But certainly sharing sort of the analysis and whatnot might be, but we're sort of constrained by the amount of time we have to do that coordination work. But certainly that's a possibility, and I don't know how many other jurisdictions are having this conversation this week or next week or in the next couple of weeks. But that's remains to be seen. We have, as planning directors, had sort of a staff level have had conversations, but nothing beyond that.
Got it.
Are as well at the town and city manager and county level discussing this Thursday. We'll have a follow-up discussion on it. But again, as you know, councils get to decide this, not the managers. And so I think we all have our own story to tell and our own really kind of interesting, unique kind of issues. And so we might be hard pressed to find the exact unique situation. Even Larkspur is a lot different than Corte Madera and what we're talking about in a lot of ways. So, but we are talking about it. And if we can do something as a group, you know, again, we have Nancy Hall Bennett with the League of California Cities that is always trying to keep us together. And we know this, that if we're always stronger as a group. And so if we can find similarities, we will definitely do that. I know that Pat Eklund is our cohort in Nevada is on the call. And so I'm really interested in what she has to say too tonight. And so we are trying to partner. We're talking weekly about it.
Great, thank you. Any other? Yeah, Bob.
Yeah, Adam, just to pick up on what Charles was asking about, isn't this just that we have to create zoning and plan for these units? We don't have to build these units, correct?
Well, that's correct. I mean, we don't build them ourselves, but there are new state laws in the last several years that have, and state bills and housing legislation that puts in place sort of takes away pieces of local control if we don't permit those units. And I think a lot of this, and this was alluded to in the letter that we wrote, or that the mayor wrote to the to ABAG during the methodology, seems like, I mean, it's gonna be very, even if we plan for them, the idea that those units are going to be built in the time frame that is expected of us to, or for those units to be built, seems very unlikely. And so what it ends up happening is then we become subject to things like SB 35 and other pieces of state housing legislation that removes local discretionary review processes and streamlines housing development, which is one of the reasons why we have the project related to objective standards, which can sort of still give us some control over what developments might look like. But that's correct, Councilmember Ravazio. But it seems to be each year more legislation that is trying to tie or sort of tie the hands of local jurisdictions in a sense, if we are not actually seeing those units permitted in the manner during that time frame.
But if MMWD bans new water hookups, as they are literally discussing this evening,
Yep.
or
Yeah, and
CMSA bans new sewer hookups, that's a whole different thing, right? That's in environmental
Unless-
impact, stuff like that all need to be checked at the building process, right?
Yeah, exactly. And unfortunately for us, I mean, our current cycle, Corte Madera is already, we've complied and have met our RENA obligations for the current cycle. So we're not subject to these state laws. But as far as I know, there aren't any state laws that would counteract that and say, like, if you're not able to do new water connections, or MMWD says there's no water, that you get your local control back. It's not, we haven't seen that legislation yet, although it may be in the works. I don't know. But
Adam, to follow up with Bob, then, so what you're saying is ultimately we create zones, we talk about the mass, and we talk about the effects of them. We say, if you want, you can try to build here. But then ultimately each one of those is bound by CEQA and its impacts on water and everything else. That's down the line, that's not local control though, that's like CEQA state, right? Water,
that's true.
The regional municipality, like the air board and all these other groups will weigh in outside of local control.
No, you're right.
And they could say no. They could say no, but so then but we've done our part as a town to say, you could have done it. There was, we allowed it. We allowed it from a general plan and a general, like, this is just paper.
No, that's true. That's true. And I see what you're saying. Yeah, the market forces and also the restrictions ultimately will not let housing be built if, in fact, there's no way to actually get water to it or to get sewer.
Okay.
Sewage
And then the other one is it says if FEMA can be a criteria. Have we actually reached out to FEMA representatives that are aware of our situation and had can we ask for basically backup addendum feedback from FEMA that they wouldn't recommend, putting those kind of numbers out there, because they're ultimately going to have to pay the price if it fails, as an idea?
No, I haven't had direct conversations with FEMA on sort of the backups to that. And I think part of the reason is a significant part of the Bay Area is also subject to the flood zones, as we know, right? So they haven't sort of countered the growth plan for the Bay Area that's been put forth by ABAG or MTC in any.
Ultimately, that's certain municipalities that border water, but I don't think that's the whole Bay Area. So maybe there are appropriate places to put units. But outside of that, I also think FEMA's a federal, and I think that if you ask me, federal goes over state. So I think if ultimately the federal government doesn't approve of it or think it's wise federal dollars, that they have a right to speak up about it, especially if it's federal. So, and then also the other thing is on the WUI side. We have our own fire chief and the analysis but we also now have this new JPA for the whole county that also could probably, have a supporting letter that raises real concerns about their inability to evacuate or deal with the type of, impacts that those kind of units would have in those areas. if we're allowed, if that's allowed in the sheets, or, I think that would be helpful, because then it's not just the council or just staff. It's that these things really do matter, and there's lots of groups involved that are highly qualified to weigh in on it. I mean,
guys, I think we're maybe verging a little bit towards discussion now. So let's.
So I guess what it is that, can you do those things? Right? Like, so there you go.
Yeah, Fred, question?
Yeah, just one more question. Adam, just to clarify, these numbers are for an 8-year period beginning 2023 to 2031, right? So
Yes.
unless MMWD cuts off water hookups for the next X amount of years, we can't use that. We can't use that argument right now, right? If the numbers don't hit until 2023, or is that kind of like you're going like a gray area?
Yeah, I mean, we can raise what issues we think we should be raising as important to counter what we think the numbers, if then we believe the numbers are too high. So we can, as to whether or not it will be accepted, that's the $1 million question here. So I don't, but certainly creating a statement or a basis for appeal on that is something we could be drafted.
Okay, thanks.
Great. Any last questions before we go to public comment? All right, we're going to open this up to public comment now. So any members of the public who would like to comment on this item, please go ahead and raise your hand via Zoom or email publiccomment@tcmmail.org. And we're going to start with Marla Orth.
Sorry, I forgot to unmute. Good evening. Great analysis, Adam. Thank you for all the other comments. I agree wholeheartedly with Charles and the direction he's going. My family's lived in Corte Madera since 1958. I remember taking rowboats from Birch Avenue up Lakeside to take people to Tamalpais because we were flooded. People had to open up their front doors to let the water out their back doors. So flooding was pervasive. As we know, a whole lot of Corte Madera is constructed on bay mud. We know that a mile of the town is actually physically underwater. We all know that some pumps are operating 24/7 in many of these places like Madera Gardens and Mariners Cove. That's not going to change. We're either going to get tidal inundation or we're going to continue to get subsidence. But I know somebody in Mariners Cove where the water is now equal to the edge of their swimming pool. Currently, I live in a very significant wildland urban interface. It's got the notorious privilege of being one of the riskiest areas, as noted by my insurance carrier today, who's now threatening to cancel my insurance yet again. Mind you, we have a $30,000 deductible and we pay $14,000 a year. And it's not going to get any better. So to Todd's point, I think there's a bunch of cases or a lot of arguments that can be made. One is we definitely do not have the infrastructure. Yes, we're thankful that we're not flooding, but we, as Charles noted, we have inadequate roads, we have low fire flow, we have no evacuation routes. I mean, it's a really big deal. And what I would urge the town consider is to use the state published reports to make the argument. It's in the Regional Water Board, it's within federal things are with FEMA, etc. Take those arguments and make them work for us. I think we have a really good argument. I really would urge the town to appeal this wholeheartedly. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marla. We do not have any other hands up at the moment. Rebecca, did we get any emailed public comments on this item?
No, we did not receive any emailed comments on this item.
Okay, and I do not see any other hands up here, so we will close public comment and bring it back to the council for discussion. And again, we're giving direction to staff on this item, and we'll start with Bob.
Yeah, I think we absolutely need to do this. We need to give this a shot. The flood situation is bad. The fire situation is only going to get worse. There's already fire insurance people not writing insurance policies on houses in Corte Madera and all over Marin County, and it's only going to get worse this year. I will tell you, having been the ABAG rep for several years, ABAG really does not care about what kind of impacts this has. It's an extremely bureaucratic organization, but we have to try. We have to give it a shot. We have to do our best. I will also tell you, it's kind of an every man for himself situation when it comes from a town by town standpoint. But we absolutely need to go about this, and Adam is approaching it in exactly the right way. This is my third RENA cycle, and this is, we got to give it a shot. Thanks.
Thank you, Bob. Who else would like to speak? Yeah, Fred.
Yeah, I too can support, I think, having staff move forward with the appeal process. I think a picture's worth 1,000 words. And Todd, when you brought up that one diagram that showed X% is underwater, the other X% is all in a high risk wildlife fire area, I think that's the telling sign there. I think also is that this is for the next eight years. So it's not like we can get another shot 5 years from now saying, hey, we're not meeting those numbers. We want to lower them. It'll be too late at that point of time. And we don't know the ramifications that could change with state legislative action going forward, that all of a sudden we find out that we're not meeting those numbers, 5 or 6 years from now. And the state's now requiring us to put duplexes, triplexes, or fourplexes in residential areas. They allow that zoning. So I think I think we have to do it now. And I would agree with Bob. I think it's every man for himself. And I think that by having the climate adaptation assessment, I think that bodes a long ways, because we already have the data. It's already there. So again, I support moving forward, or having staff move forward with the appeal process.
Thank you, Fred. Who else would like to speak? Yeah, Leela.
Yeah, I agree that I think it's worth a shot. It's pretty depressing to look at the numbers on appeals that were upheld, so I'm not holding my breath. And I want to be careful with staff time and town resources for something that we think is unlikely to succeed. But at the same time, this feels like we do have a lot of circumstances that we want to feel confident that we brought it to their attention and made all the arguments that we could make. So I would support filing the appeal as well.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, Leela. And like you and Bob said, it's a bureaucratic organization. I think we don't really go into this with any real expectation, I think, of winning, but to me, this is kind of akin to what we did on 5G, right? Where we joined a lawsuit against the FCC, against the federal government, that we knew we were not likely to win, but we did it because, we had to stand on principle in this kind of outstanding situation where it's like, the FCC came to us with a proposal that we thought was ludicrous. And I think it's the same thing here, right? The state wants us to build 725 new units in a town that is like, what did we say, 87% hazard zone. That's crazy. That doesn't make any sense. And I'm pro housing. I'm not anti-growth or anything like that, but this is crazy. I think, we absolutely need housing, and we need it in the Bay Area, but Corte Madera is not a reasonable place to put this many units, just given the situation, our geographical situation, and the flood zone and the fire zone. I think we made a lot of really valid points in our October 6th letter that, as Todd said, looks like fell on deaf ears, trying to explain the fact that there's, like a handful of blocks in Corte Madera that are not in some sort of hazard zone. And now, in addition to that, as was brought up, we have another, I think, really compelling argument, which is the drought, right? And you want to now cram folks into areas where, we're seeing that they don't even have in drought years, which are fairly common, they don't even have the water supplies to adequately supply the current population. You want to cram more people in there. You would need a desal plant to really make that, I think, a reasonable proposition long term. And then, as was also mentioned, it's like if we go through with this ban on new hookups at MMWD, as we said, drought is not a new or a rare thing here in Northern California. So I think it's perfectly reasonable to assume that if we're seeing this now, it's going to be a recurring feature in the coming years. So I think all these factors come together to really make this proposal, just look kind of ludicrous on its face. And I completely agree that I think this is something that we need to really push back. and say, hey, look, this is insane. You know, it's just poor. It feels to me like poor long-term planning. Looking at the fact that our natural hazards are not getting better; they're getting worse. You know, the floodplain expands every time FEMA releases a new map, and so it just feels like there seems to be a disconnect between the reality on the ground and you know, the planning process, which is maybe a generous term, that's going on here with this. So I completely agree. Any other comments from council members? Yeah, Charles.
Yeah, so I think what I don't think that being a bureaucracy is an excuse. I don't think that our residents and us representing them want this amount of numbers to come through. I don't care if we're successful or not. I just think that it is. And I'm not going to belittle what they're doing, because I think it's a masterful approach for what they're trying to accomplish, which was political planning at the expense of actionable planning, right? So they can go ahead and make the political statements they want, and we can make the ones we want, and whether they listen to us or not, that's to be determined. But ultimately, there are other safeguards that help protect the community from failure, which I think this would ultimately lead to. I also have issues with the punitive ability. Like, if we're not able to do it because they actually assigned too much mass or land use that the town can't even provide, and then they basically try to take tax rights away from us, it gets back to really old arguments of no taxation without representation. So like, ultimately, you know, if they're basically making a law that or rules that ultimately are not achievable, and there are consequences and fines and, or, you know, taking away taxes and goodies, I think that in itself is, you know, something to explore down the road, because for many people, because I think that their numbers were never challenged. So I think, you know, the appeals were probably because the numbers were reasonable in the past, right? And I agree with you, Eli. I'm not a no growth or slow growth. I'm a do it well. I love my community. I think there's lots of potential for lots of low income, middle income, and high income units still to come. But it doesn't mean destroying the fabric that we've had this whole time, and it doesn't mean doing it very quickly, because that's not how you build Rome. So, you know, I just don't believe that those numbers are reasonable for such a small community in 10 years, you know. So I definitely want to challenge them because of the constraints. The only other thing I also wanted to thank, you know, Marla for speaking up. You know, the state insurance commissioner often contacts the council, gives us updates about their concerns with the WUI and fire and all the other insurance issues. So it might be nice to kind of also get their take on it, because I'm sure they don't want to see these built in the WUI when there's adequate land in Marin and other places within the Bay Area to build them safely. So that's my 2 cents.
That reminded me, Charles, I also wanted to say that I too support Fred and Marla's strategies that they brought up of using graphics showing maps, and then also you know, to Marla's point. So I think that, you know, I think those are good strategy points for us to heed going forward. Any other comments? All right, great. Adam and Todd, does that sound clear enough?
Yeah, and I think the next steps, we would come back at the July 6th council meeting, which would be an opportunity for us to present, or at least the draft of the appeal, and then you know, have time to submit that by July 9th. And we would be seeking your authorization at that time.
Great, thank you. All righty, guys, appreciate it. That, I believe, concludes our business items and brings us to item 7, which is council reports, and we will start with the town manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. Just a few quick updates. As some of you may know, and I was alerted by Councilmember Lee this morning, so thank you for that. But we have moved into the yellow tier, which is great. And as you know, statewide, June 15th is a big day for the state, as we'll go to a little bit more normalcy. Really, the restrictions, which are really key to our county, you know, have to do with large gatherings of 5,000 or more. And so when we start thinking about the summer, Sunday concerts in Piccolo Pavilion. We're going to approve those. Those will start on June 12th. And so we're going to start advertising those concerts, which I think are important to get us back to some normalcy, get our community together. We're also talking to some business owners on maybe the 4th of July, doing a much smaller event, but something where we can at least have people congregate safely and enjoy the 4th and just have a sense of community. We're also working with the vice mayor and others on, over at the old lot out from Nordstrom. Actually, it's the new lot out from Nordstrom, but having to enjoy some cars out there and to do an event this summer. And so we're going to start really focusing as staff on how to do summer events safely, but really starting to open up a little bit. I know there's been a lot of conversations at the community center, at Town Park to allow a little bit more. We're going to do that on Monday. Staff is going to kind of set that process and put it in place and start educating the community on what we can do as we open up. And so I'm really excited about that. And I know the council is as well. One of the other things I think I could do a better job as a town manager, and I'm really excited about this. I give credit to one of my cohorts. He retired in Sausalito. His name is Adam Pulitzer. He was one of the grandfathers of the Leadership Academy for our staff in Marin County, kind of based on what the League of California Cities does for new council members. And we basically trained our staff, our directors, our all employees within government on just leadership and really understanding your role, but really building kind of a leadership program and contacts for those of us that go through the program in government to have those relationships of people that you could depend on when you need them. And something that really jumped out at us, we're going to have a meeting tomorrow, but we would like to this year put in place kind of that leadership academy for our directors that run all the boards and commissions and councils. And really do that leadership for the staff, but also for all those boards and commissioners and council members, and really talk about what our roles are in government from each of those really important levels of providing recommendations at the commission level and also as a new council member. I think that's something we're lacking in Corte Madera. We have some really great boards and commissions. I think it's as you get on, it's important to give them that support and that education to really help them move forward and understand the process. And so that really jumped out at me. So I'm going to meet with Adam and some of our other city and town managers to really put that in place. Corte Madera is all in. And so look out for that. I'll continue to talk to the council about that in the coming months, but I think it's something we need hopefully to have it implemented in the next 4 to 6 months here in Marin and start running our new boards and commissions through it and our new directors. So that'll be a really, I think, really big upgrade for the town. The other thing that we're working on is August will be, we're going to ask the council not to have any meetings in August. It's usually a quiet month for us. And so we'll shut down and people can enjoy their vacations. And then we'll come back in September to have a council work plan. And really, normally we have the council work plan in April, but as you know, COVID and really trying to finish our work plan this year, we really needed till September to do it. And so what we'll do is we'll come to council in September and set a work plan probably until April. So from September to April of 22. So it'll be a 9 to 10 month work plan, get back on track on our normal schedule. But we'll come to council in September to kind of set that. And then close in mind, I'll work closely with the mayor and vice mayor on this, but maybe time shortly after or before that work plan conversation, a joint meeting with the council and the planning commission. I think we're overdue on that. And I think, work with Adam to see, how we can, things that the planning commission would like to talk about for the work plan, either pre or post, but have that, whatever we decide, have that communication amongst both of you, so you can really kind of set the philosophy and the agenda moving forward. I think that'll be a really important piece for us as well. And so staff is talking about that, and we're starting to set the stage to put that in place. And with that, that's all I have for now. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Great, thank you, Todd. Any questions for Todd? Yeah, Fred.
Hey, Todd, one quick question, but I think I'm getting ahead of it. June 15th, after when everything opens up, and I think there's probably discussions ongoing, are we going to go back to two-part? Are we going to go back to having meetings in person from town council, and or would we still be allowed to have Zoom meetings even if we go back in person. And now it may be too early.
Yeah. So we're talking about at the manager level, what everyone's doing. I'll tell you that Amy is taking the lead as our town attorney, really following the law. The League of California Cities recently asked the governor, as we come out of the June 15th changes, to really think about allowing government agencies time to re-implement in-person meetings, to allow us some time. And so we're following that really closely. We have, Amy and her team is very involved at the state level. And so we're tracking that. And so as we get direction on what the changes are statewide with the law and, on public meetings, we will make those changes quickly and engage the council. Even though it hasn't been determined, a lot of the cities are focusing, if they can, and again, obviously it's the direction of the law, you got to follow the rules, but September is what a lot of the agencies were kind of with technology thinking about, maybe doing a hybrid between Zoom and in person, and kind of doing a hybrid and kind of working your way to normalcy towards the end of the year. But again, that all is, it's based on what the governor decides, in June, or this month. So we're following it very closely. It's a daily kind of conversation. And so once I know first the guidance of the law for public meetings, we will come back to council immediately and we'll have a discussion with you on recommendations and what you would like to do moving forward. We're positioned to have public meetings if we have to tomorrow, but if we can, we would like to, explore the hybrid opportunity. But again, we'll communicate with you immediately on that.
Okay, thanks. I know it's state law driven, but to me, there's a benefit if we could do a hybrid. I think it's if we could. So thanks.
Great, thank you. Any other questions for Todd? Yeah, Leela.
I just want to say I'm very excited to hear the news about the Sunday concerts. Are there going to be restrictions? Do you know? Like, is there going to be a limit on the number of people that can come or anything like that?
Yeah, so historically, it's been about 200 to 300 people. Given, as it starts, it's a little bit slower, but 200 to 300 is usually the number. There are no restrictions, but we're going to look at the area. We're going to monitor it from, Sunday to Sunday and make changes as necessary. We're going to try to keep people as distant as possible, but at this point, there are no restrictions.
Great, thank you.
Great. Any other questions for Todd? All right, and if not, we'll do our council reports and we will start with Charles.
Well, due to unforeseen circumstances, Eli Beckman stepped in and represented Corte Madera at TAM, so I'll let him speak to that meeting. Outside of that, that was my main duty. So I will report that I heard Marin is the most vaccinated county in the country currently. And I know that's been a big push by the mayor and others. And so I think we should all be proud. And I think that this opening up and in general, just our overall health and safety will be improved because of the initiative that our residents have taken. And I appreciate that. So.
Great, thank you, sir. We will go to Leela.
I attended the anyway, the group of mayors and council members, the climate meeting. There's a subcommittee on climate action. We got a presentation from Drawdown Marin with a lot of really interesting information about what they're working on to counter climate change. I attended the Marin Clean Energy Board meeting. I think that's it.
Great, thank you. Bob?
We had another homeless committee meeting, and we are going to be eventually, I think, coming to the council to talk about asking for a portion of the ARP funds be allocated, a small percentage be allocated for reducing homeless encampments, hiring staff basically to get people housing vouchers and into housing. So hopefully more on that to come soon. We also had a special meeting of the wildfire JPA to approve the new budget for next year, and we approved a budget which has $10.6 million in core projects and almost $4 million in defensible space. There were 111 individual projects we approved across 17 different towns and fire districts. It's a big, big list and it's complex. But we're in Central Marin with Ross Valley, and among the projects we're going to be doing, there's going to be defensible space evaluation. There's going to be a project for road clearing evacuation routes, 15 feet high, 10 feet on the sides. That's a $1.3 million project. And we are going to do the preliminary study and plan to create an RFP with the project starting next year, which is going to be a shaded fuel break and forest health restoration project, which is going to be 200 feet wide, running along between open space and all the towns along the Ross Valley. So that's a huge, huge project. And there's also been several grants for defensible space abatement programs that we're going to institute too. So a lot going on, really busy on that, but really, really great progress. And it's really exciting to see we're finally getting some moving forward with some of this stuff. Thanks.
Great. Thank you for your great work there. Fred.
Yeah, I attended the monthly MCCMC meeting. It took me a while, Leila, to get that down. Monthly meeting. One thing that did come out of there, and I may say her name wrong, but the DA for Marin County, Lori Fugoli. Actually, tomorrow, Marin County is starting a gun safety campaign to get people aware of putting locks on guns. And Todd, I wasn't sure, does CMPA provide lock for guns? Do you know?
They do. They
Okay.
do.
Okay. So again, I think that's going to be going on during the month of June. I attended along with Leila Casa Buena working group, which we met last week. The one thing out of there is that Marin County are the ones that are going to be doing the improvements to the Casa Buena, including kitchenettes on the inside, and then improvement work on the exterior. Because it's Marin County doing the work, they don't have to come to the town to get permits. It's run through Marin County, but we were definitely on the track where they will be working with staff, including Adam. They're working with the working group also, and we will be having some type of a community meeting to show the exterior and what the concept is and what's that going to look like. So again, we're back to the thing with the working group, with it being a partnership with the town and Marin County, and not just Marin County going solo, even though again, they don't have to go through the town to get permits. I also attended age-friendly Corte Madera in September. We're looking at doing the Corte Madera honors again. That's for those that are 90 years and older. I'm sorry, that'll be in August. And then Todd mentioned the Corte Madera Lions in September is looking at doing an EV, electric vehicle, and classic car show in the parking lot across from Nordstrom's. There's already been meetings with Julie Kreitzberg from the chamber, as well as Stan from the general manager of the village. I think it's going to be a great event. We'll get sponsorships, or the Lions will get sponsorships from the local car dealerships. It's a free community event. There will be beer, wine, music. And I look at it, it's one of these partnership things because it is a fundraiser through the sponsorships with the Lions Club, but we're engaging the business, local businesses, and we're also engaging the community. So it's one of those win-win-win type events, and the town's totally supportive also. And that's it.
Thank you, Fred. And question for Fred and Todd on the car show. Do you guys know, has that been coordinated at all with the Climate Action Committee? Because I know that they were possibly independently thinking about doing an electric car show. So it could be a good opportunity to join forces.
It hasn't come up, no.
Okay. Yeah, maybe worth reaching out because that could be a good way to kind of get more buy-in and more help.
Okay.
My three reports are pretty brief. They all tie into what we were talking about earlier tonight. So I attended a meeting of TAM. The big thing of the evening was an update on Plan Bay Area, which is like, kind of like RENA, but larger scale. And it's not just housing, it's housing, it's every kind of growth, transportation, environment, like everything. And so it was kind of, I feel like my eyes always kind of glaze over a little bit when they give these presentations because they're just so massive and like all enveloping. And it's all I think when you're planning 30 years out like this for an entire region, a lot of it is very kind of conjectural, but it was interesting to see. And then we also TAM took their positions on various state bills, and I'm not going to read through all of them right now, but the list is available on the website in TAM's agenda packet. At the League of Cities, we had a meeting with Assemblymember Levine Our main ask for him was about additional funding. California ran a $100 billion surplus this year, which is incredible. And so the cities are asking, especially Corte Madera and other cities that are really dependent on TOT, transient occupancy tax, the hotel tax. Sales tax came back really post-COVID, and we got a big boost from state and federal funding to fill in that gap. TOT did not come back and is really kind of still a gaping hole for Corte Madera and a lot of cities. So we asked Assemblymember Levine to create, up to a $10 billion fund to really kind of close the TOT gap for cities in his district. And then one other thing that he mentioned that I thought was huge is he mentioned that he's, I think, working on a bill right now. I can't remember the bill number. I'll get back to you on that. But basically what it is it's a bill to introduce flood and fire hazard into the RENA formula, which I think is exactly what we've been talking about for years now. And I know, Jim Andrews, when he was on the council, I think was ahead of a lot of us in kind of highlighting that as an issue. So I was thrilled to hear that Assemblymember Levine is working on a bill. More information on that to come, but I think that's probably something that we would be very eager to support. And I think it's very validating, right? It says that we're not crazy for looking at these RENA numbers and thinking that doesn't make sense here. So I think that was really great. And the last thing is I attended a working group meeting for the Objective Development Design Standards that Adam mentioned, which is basically developing a guidebook of objective standards for multifamily housing that's going to, theoretically meet some requirements under state law and kind of ease the path for developers to do multifamily housing projects in Corte Madera, kind of easing our compliance with RENA, making that process a little more streamlined. So great process there. Adam and his staff continue to do great work, and I think they're pressing ahead at a really impressive rate. And that is all I've got for my report. We'll move on to discussion of draft agenda. Do we have any comments on the draft agenda for our next meeting? All right, and if not, we do have an SD2 meeting. So we're going to adjourn the Corte Madera Town Council meeting and call to order the Tuesday, June 1st meeting of the Sanitary District 2, Board of Directors. And Rebecca, could we have a roll call, please?
Board Member Lee,
Here.
Board Member Mongan,
Here.
Board Member Ravazio,
Here.
Board Vice President Casissa,
Here.
and Board President Beckman.
Here, thank you. All right, we will waive the salute to the flags. We just did that for our last meeting. That brings us to open time for public comment. This is an opportunity for members of the public to comment on any items that are not on our agenda, and members of the public will be given 3 minutes apiece. Would any member of the public like to make any public comment for this meeting? And if so, please raise your hand via Zoom or email publiccomment@tcmmail.org. And Rebecca, did we get any emails for SD2 open time?
No, there were no emailed public comments.
Great, thank you. And we do not have any hands up, so we will close open time. There are no presentations tonight, which brings us to our consent calendar. These are items that are routine or have been previously discussed and do not require further discussion. And any member of the board or public may pull an item from the consent calendar for discussion. Would any members of the board like to pull any items from the consent calendar? Seeing none, would any members of the public like to pull any items from the consent calendar? And Rebecca, did we get any emails for SD2 consent calendar items?
No, there were no emailed public comments.
Great, thank you. And we have no hands up, so we will close public comment and bring the consent calendar back to the board for a possible motion. Yeah, Fred?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and make a motion. We approve consent item 4A for the.
Thank you, sir. Do we have a second? Great, thank you.
Here.
And Rebecca, whenever you're ready.
Okay.
Board Member Lee,
Yes.
Board Member Mongan.
Yeah.
Board Member Ravazio,
Yes.
Board Vice President Casissa,
Yes.
and Board President Beckman.
Yes, thank you very much. That brings us to item 5, our public hearings. Our only public hearing for tonight is 5A, which is review the proposed Sanitary District 2 operating budget for fiscal year 2021-2022 and provide direction to staff as appropriate. And I will turn it over to Daria.
Thank you. The sanitary district, as you know, is a subsidiary of the town, a component unit, and its budget is separate and is in the back of the budget binder and is also attached to the staff report, I believe. You may notice that this budget looks a little bit different than the town's budget in that there's a net position as opposed to an ending fund balance shown. That has to do with accounting rules of the Governmental Accounting Standards Board. The town's funds are a modified accrual system, accounting system that emphasizes the short-term fund balances. And then in the financial system, financial statements, they're converted to a government-wide. And so both the fund balance and the government-wide are shown in full accrual and modified accrual. But in the sanitary district, it's just the full accrual. So there's no such thing as ending fund balance. It's just this, this net position. So the sanitary district receives the vast majority of its revenue from property tax and from sewer user fees, about 98% between the two of them. And neither of those was affected by the pandemic. So that revenue was not affected whatsoever. Property taxes are increasing slightly next year by about 2.8%. And the sewer district user charges are charged as a flat rate and have been for many years. So there's no increase. So basically, revenues are just increasing by about $100,000 due to property tax increases. Then for the expenditures, they're divided into operating expenditures, debt service payments, and then depreciation expense. The capital projects are shown in the back. I did them, last year, the current year, and the proposed budget, just so that you could see them all and that it didn't look too different from the town's budget. But here, it's depreciation which is shown in accordance with the rules. So for operating expenses, they're expected to increase just slightly, about $20,000 for training, and then $100,000 for district supplies. And also included in the operating expenses is the money that the sanitary district reimburses the town for town staff. The sanitary district does not have any employees of its own. Town staff provide work, and then the sanitary district pays the town for those employees' time. The debt service payments are flat. Those are Central Marin Sanitation Agency's debt service payments for capital projects. And then also there's about $1.1 million in grant programs included in the budget. And these programs are intended to assist property owners with repairs to sewer laterals. And they were previously approved by the Sanitary District Board. So in the current year, you may notice that expenditures are coming in about $1 million or more under budget. And that's a result of not many people taking advantage of this grant program. There was over $1 million budgeted for this year and only about 70,000 or maybe 77,000 or so paid out. So it's carried over into next year. That's what that is. So you'll notice that the net position is virtually unchanged. However, the composition of the net position is changed in that because there's going to be so many capital projects anticipated that the net investment in capital assets is increasing from about a projection of about 23.5 million to 29 million. The reserve is staying the same at 2.5 million, and it's the net position, unrestricted position that is changing, is decreasing by nearly $3 million, because that's like the cash because it's being expended. Those are those capital projects. So as I understand it, a rate study is in process right now, in progress. That will probably, the results of those will come next year if it's determined that the fees need to be raised. So that is the sanitary district budget. if there are any questions.
Great. Thank you very much, Daria. And we will take questions. We'll start with Leela and then Fred and Charles.
Thanks, Daria. Just a quick question about the reserve. I know, for the town, we have recently approved having a 20% reserve. What percent does this represent for the sanitary district budget?
Let's see, that it would probably be a little less than 10%. It looks, well, no, well, of total expense. It's a little bit different because I don't have the capital expenditures on it in expenditures because the rules are a little bit different. A flat amount of $2.5 million was approved by the town. But if you, excuse me, the sanitary district board, I think maybe last year, I'm not sure the exact date. But if you were to take, like, if it was like sort of an apples to apples, if we counted all of those capital projects in here, it's, let's see, that's about 12, 10. That's about I guess about, let's see, that's about a 25% reserve if we were doing it the same way.
Great. Thank you, Leela. Let's go to Fred.
Yeah, just to dovetail off something Leela just said, do we need or should we have a reserve policy for the sanitary district similar to what we have for the town, or do we have one?
I know that the sanitary district board did approve the $2.5 million. I don't know if we called it a policy. We can bring one back. I can look into that and bring it back if it wasn't called. I don't remember what it was called, but I can look into that and bring it back if it wasn't called a policy.
Thanks. And then the other question is, can you let us know what the formula is or the process for the employees that are working for the town, but the district reimburses the town? I don't know if there's a formula to that or how you figure that out.
Yes, in the beginning of the year for the budget, I consult with the public works director, and there's certain, I think we take a percentage of the town manager's time, my time, small percentages, and then like a more significant portion of the public work director's time, and then of each maintenance worker and engineer. We estimate how much time they're going to be spent, of their total time is going to be spent on the sanitary district. That's what's included in the budget. And then during the course of the year, the public works director reviews that and determines if that actually took place or, should be adjusted.
Okay, thanks.
Great, thank you. And Charles?
So I had two questions. So following up on Fred, that's a great question. It made me think. When we pay the town from the sewer, the sewer district, is it ultimately direct salary, or are you putting a multiplier on it for overhead and these other retirement funds and that type of thing? Like, ultimately, should that also be included? So if we're really allocating them for the long term, if it's a short term thing where we're just letting them go over there for a year or two because their extra staffing's needed, I can understand it. But overall, as a policy, if they're functioning as a town employee and become a town liability, but are doing majority, sewer board work, does it make more sense to really understand it in that way, that, there's more to it than just the salary cost? That's a question I have. I don't know if ultimately, it's something that I think might be something to think about if it isn't. But and then the other one was the net position unrestricted portion. When you were discussing it, you brought up that ultimately that it seemed like it triggered that there might be a rate increase. But my question is, to build that surplus to then do that, was that something that accrued very quickly, or is that something that's been building up for 10 years? We're moving forward with these big projects and we're not sure if we'll be able to build huge capacity. Is that what she was alluding to?
Yeah, I'll take the second part, Daria. Can you answer the first? Do we use the total compensation?
Okay, with regard to overhead, the sanitary district does directly pay utility costs, supplies, vehicle costs. A portion of the insurance is paid directly from the sanitary district, separate from the salaries. And then as I understand it, the sanitary district doesn't have direct employees and doesn't pay retirement to avoid having a PERS contract. So retirement is not a charge.
But our town employees do. So when we basically
Yes.
tell them that we need to be compensated to run the town correctly, we need to account for that as well. So my question was, are we accounting for that, or is it just base salary that we're pulling from those accounts?
I believe it's, let me just look quickly here. I have it. I will look. I believe that it is that it is
Percentage of total compensation.
sorry, I'm just trying to look this up.
I was looking that up, Councilmember Lee. The other piece is, to your question, we did build up, over, $9 to $10 million in funds in previous years. And one of the issues we had was having staff to deliver some of these projects and really develop a plan. And so that's part of when we built up our public works team and really evaluating what are we trying to accomplish and what do we need to accomplish it. Over the past few years, we've started to develop our capital improvement plans. And what you're seeing now over the last 2 years is we're starting to deliver it and completing some big multi-million-dollar projects. And during that time, we've never had a reserve. And so we also looked at, hey, if something catastrophic happened, how much money do we bring on an annual basis? What should that number be in a reserve fund to allow us, not necessarily on the town side where we're like, hey, we need to pay for salaries and benefits for 2 months in a disaster, right? How you develop that 20% reserve. We're more looking at it in projects. Hey, if you needed a dry fund to carry over from year to year as your revenues come in, what is that number that would allow you to continue with the operations in the first 2 quarters of any fiscal year to really still develop and continue with your projects as revenue came in? And so that $2.5 million was developed by the finance subcommittee. We haven't raised fees in, I think, 8 or 9 years. Daria, correct me if I'm wrong.
That's right.
If we do deliver these capital improvement projects as we're estimating, and we bring that account down to 1 million in unrestricted, RJ and his team this fiscal year are looking at the schedule moving forward of, hey, what are we trying to accomplish in the next 5 to 10 years? What are our recommendations? And then what are the costs? And then tie that into our revenue to expenditure analysis over 10 years, and then provide a recommendation to council on our current fee structure and if any changes should be made to it.
Okay, and then my only other question with that fee is, it's great as a resident that that's not going up, but at the same time, usually at least with salaries, since it's a lot of operational expenditure, is there are we doing the 2% inflationary increase overall to those? It's just flat. So
it's been flat, and I'll take responsibility for that, Councilmember Lee. And one of the issues that I struggle with is when I had $9.2 million sitting in a fund, I was looking at staff saying, I'm not raising fees unless we're going to spend this money. And what is our plan? And so they finally developed a plan. We started delivering these projects. And I still think we have an 18 to 24 month conversation to then, as you state, hey, let's develop at least a standard 2% or so increase based on analysis. And then do we need to do anything else specific to keep up with the times? And so,
right. And is that also tied to the water planning, the flood planning, the master plan that's coming up? Or is the sewer district not involved with that?
Yeah, it's a separate conversation. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Those are great answers.
I was able to look up, and the town does allocate PERS as well as payroll costs and health and welfare. So that $945,000 that does include all of that.
Great, thank you. That makes me happy.
Great, thank you guys. Any other questions? All right, and if not, we will turn this over to the public. So if any members of the public would like to comment on this item, please go ahead and raise your hand via Zoom or email publiccomment@tcmmail.org. And Rebecca, did we get any emails on the SD2 budget?
No, Mayor Beckman, we did not get any emails in the budget.
Okay, thank you. And we don't have any hands up, so we'll close public comment and bring it back to the board for discussion and a possible motion. Who'd like to start us off? Yeah, Bob.
I'll move to approve.
Thank you, sir. Do we have a second? Great, thank you, Fred. And Rebecca, whenever you're ready.
So this was a direction to staff item.
Oh, was it? Oh,
The town
okay.
council budget. It's a first meeting and possible direction to bring this back to staff for additional discussion and final approval at the next, the subsequent meeting. That
my bad. Okay, great.
Well, that was anticlimactic, Rebecca. Thanks a lot. Just kidding.
Well, we were ready to vote, so clearly it was good. Great. Okay, no business items tonight. Do we have any district manager or board member reports? All right, seeing none, any comments on our draft agenda? And if not, we are adjourned for the evening. Thank you, everybody. That was a long one. Appreciate it. Have a good night.
Thank you,
Thanks, all.
Council.
Bye, everybody.